Chapter 433. No need, I'm here. The blood demon ancestor's eerie voice resounded. The heavens and the earth were filled with powerful energy. Greetings, ancestor. Seeing the blood demon ancestor, the people of the holy blood demon cult finally relax. With the ancestor around, they had nothing to fear. You're just a 7th-level martial saint. How dare you be so arrogant? Feeling the power emanating from Yi Hao, the blood demon ancestor said disdainfully. Then, the blood demon ancestor's gaze landed on the blood-scar dual blades. His face was filled with joy. Ha ha, good treasures. They're mine now. The blood demon ancestor was knowledgeable and could naturally tell that the blood-scar dual blades were not ordinary spiritual artifacts. Feeling the aura of the blood demon ancestor, the devouring beast's expression became unnatural. However, it still attacked the blood demon ancestor. Trash! Seeing the devouring beast attacking him, the blood demon ancestor snorted disdainfully. Then, the aura of his body surged. Plop! The devouring beast instantly became like a weightless plane. With a plop, it fell to the ground, causing cracks to appear on the ground. Everyone could feel the ground trembling. It was clear how strong the blood demon ancestor was. Ancestor is mighty. Ancestor is mighty. Seeing the blood demon ancestor's might and how easily he subdued the devouring beast, the morale of the holy blood demon cult rose. Kid, hand over the heavenly Een spirit and the dual blades. If you join the holy blood demon cult, I can spare your life. The blood demon ancestor said in a tone as if he was giving Yi Hao alms. Actually, he would not let Yi Hao off so easily. It was just that if he killed Yi Hao, the heavenly Een spirit would disappear. Therefore, he had to trick Yi Hao into handing over the heavenly Een spirit first. Moreover, he believed that if Yi Hao lost the blood-scar dual blades, he would not be a match for him. At that time, he would refine Yi Hao into a blood corpse. A martial saint blood corpse would definitely be very powerful. Master, look at how cunning this old fellow is. You can't trust him. Seeing the cunning look in the blood demon ancestor's eyes, the Fire Emperor reminded him worriedly. Shut up, trash! The blood demon ancestor glared at the Fire Emperor impatiently. Following which, the blood fiend ancestor shot out a powerful beam of energy towards the Fire Emperor. The Fire Emperor's face fell as he felt as if he had been locked down by this strange energy. There was no way for him to escape. Didn't this mean that he was doomed? If you want to hit my people, you'll have to get through me first. Yi Hao immediately charged towards the blood demon ancestor's attack, blocking the Fire Emperor. Boom! In an instant, Yi Hao and the blood demon ancestor's attack collided. Pfft! Yi Hao immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Damn it, the peak of the martial sage realm is indeed extraordinary. Seeing Yi Hao vomit blood, the blood demon ancestor was not surprised at all. He placed his hands behind his back and said, Brat, resistance is useless. Just obediently kneel and beg for mercy. I can still spare your life. Is that so? Yi Hao wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and asked mockingly. The blood demon ancestor raised his eyebrows and asked disdainfully, Why? Do you have any other tricks up your sleeves? Just use them. Zhang Fei, kill this bird for me. Seeing how arrogant the blood demon ancestor was, Yi Hao was filled with anger. Zhang Fei? The blood demon ancestor was stunned as he looked around Yi Hao. He didn't know who Zhang Fei was. Old bastard, give me your life! Zhang Fei shouted angrily as he suddenly charged out from behind the blood demon ancestor. The blood demon ancestor's expression changed drastically. How could there be another strong cultivator? This aura is definitely not below mine. The blood demon ancestor didn't dare to underestimate Zhang Fei. He immediately grabbed Yi Hao. He believed that as long as he could capture Yi Hao, Zhang Fei would be at his mercy. The sect leader reacted quickly as well. Disciples, listen to my orders. Stop him. The sect leader took the lead and charged towards Zhang Fei. Those who block me will die. Zhang Fei swept the snake spear behind him, and the sect leader was instantly sent flying. Countless disciples were killed or injured. You want to capture me? Yi Hao immediately put the Fire Emperor and the devouring beast into the dragon prison lake before entering it himself. Inside the dragon prison lake. Brat, come out if you have the guts. Seeing Yi Hao suddenly disappear, the blood demon ancestor couldn't help but shout in exasperation. Old bastard, fight me if you have the guts. Zhang Fei finally caught up. Let's fight. Do you think I'm afraid of you? The blood demon ancestor was annoyed that he couldn't capture Yi Hao. However, that didn't mean that he was afraid of Zhang Fei. He had been a peak martial sage for hundreds of years. No matter what, he was still a veteran peak martial sage. One could imagine how strong his foundation was. In the blood demon ancestor's opinion, although Zhang Fei was a peak martial sage, his cultivation level was definitely not stronger than his. The blood demon ancestor's body emitted a monstrous demonic aura. A bloody palm that filled the sky attacked Zhang Fei. The snake spear in Zhang Fei's hand immediately met the attack. In an instant, the two of them had already exchanged thousands of blows. It was impossible to see clearly with the naked eye. Moreover, the two of them fought more and more fiercely. They fought directly into the sky. The crowd could only see that tens of thousands of meters high in the sky. The martial arts of the two of them were constantly emitting dazzling light. At this moment, Yi Hao and the Fire Emperor came out of the dragon prison lake again. Who exactly is the master? He even has a peak martial sage. The Fire Emperor raised his head and looked at the sky. His gaze then landed on Yi Hao. At this moment, he was very curious. Logically speaking, a person like Yi Hao should have a peak martial sage with him. That person should be a famous existence in the 10,000 countries continent. However, he really couldn't find any information about Yi Hao. Could it be that he came from the upper realm and came to the mortal realm to train? Thinking about how Yi Hao's cultivation level could break through whenever he wanted, and how he broke through to the 6th stage in one go, the Fire Emperor couldn't help but guess. Go and take down this kid. When the time comes, the Patriarch will reward you handsomely. The sect leader crawled up from his wounds. When he saw Yi Hao and the Fire Emperor, he immediately ordered the hundreds of thousands of disciples. He believed that no matter how heaven-defying Yi Hao was, he wouldn't have a good time under the pressure of hundreds of thousands of disciples. Let's see who dares to move. Yi Hao carried his twin sabers on his shoulders and looked like a gangster leader. His eyes were filled with a fearless ruthlessness. The disciples of the Blood Demon sect were originally fierce people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have joined the Blood Demon sect. However, when they saw Yi Hao's stance, they felt that they were just obedient children. Moreover, when Yi Hao killed tens of thousands of people with a single slash, they were completely frightened. As martial artists, they naturally knew how powerful a martial sage was and how unreachable a martial sage was. Against Yi Hao, they were just cannon fodder. Since everyone knew what was going on, none of them dared to take the lead. If the Patriarch was here, they might have taken the lead. However, the Patriarch was being held back by Zhang Fei. There was no one here who could suppress Yi Hao. All of you, are you not going to listen to the sect leader's words? Do you want to be punished according to the sect's rules? Seeing that the disciples were too afraid to take the lead, the sect leader snorted in disdain. Chapter 434. Sect Rules. Yi Hao laughed disdainfully. Do you think he can still live? Yi Hao's words instantly attracted everyone's attention to the sect leader. What do you want? Could it be that you want to attack me? Seeing the gazes of the disciples, the sect leader panicked for no reason. Devouring Beast. Yi Hao immediately summoned the Devouring Beast. Kill him! The Devouring Beast was a second-level martial sage. How could the sect leader, who was only a high-level martial emperor, compare to it? The sect leader felt his body being locked on by the Devouring Beast, which made him shudder. He knew that although he was talented and could fight against people of a higher level, he was like a baby in front of a second-level martial sage. Protect the sect leader. As the sect leader of the blood demon cult, how could he not have a few loyal guards? A 7th-level martial emperor immediately jumped out and shouted. Then, more than 20 martial emperors jumped out. Protect the sect leader. If you don't attack, you will be punished according to the sect rules. Kill. Yi Hao's lips moved slightly and he spat out the word kill. The 20 martial emperors looked at the devouring beast cautiously. Although there were more than 20 martial emperors, they had to be careful when facing a second-level martial sage. However, to their surprise, the devouring beast stood there motionlessly. Just as everyone was puzzled, a scream suddenly rang out. Everyone looked at the source of the scream and saw a corpse on the ground. It was one of the 20 martial emperors who jumped out. What is going on? The 20 martial emperors were shocked and they looked around vigilantly. Save. Before the crowd could react, another blood-curdling scream was heard. Another martial emperor had died. At this moment, everyone's hearts were filled with fear. They did not know who had killed the devouring beast. 2 of their people had already died. Who knew if they would be the next one to die? Save me! Another martial emperor cried out for help in the blink of an eye. Everyone was even more terrified. In the blink of an eye, 3 martial emperors had died. How could they accept this? Most importantly, they still didn't know where the killer was. Who are you? What did you do? A martial emperor who had completely collapsed looked at Yi Hao in fear and shouted. He did not look like a martial emperor at all. Yi Hao did not even bother to look at him. A pitiful person must have a detestable side. Who asked him to act tough and jump out at this moment? The miserable cries for mercy did not stop. 10-odd martial emperors died one after another. At this moment, there were less than 10 martial emperors completely collapsed. They did not even try to defend themselves, because they knew that they would not be able to escape death. My lord, I was wrong. Please spare my lowly life. I don't want to die. Suddenly, one of the martial emperors knelt on the ground with a putong sound and cried, "Screw your dignity. I want to live. It wasn't easy for me to cultivate to the martial emperor level. I don't want my efforts to be wasted like this." The martial emperor who was kneeling on the ground started glaring at the sect leader. "You are courting death." As the sect master, his subordinates dared to talk back to him. He was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. "All of you, kill this spineless thing for me." The sect leader ordered the remaining martial emperors who were loyal to him. Plop, plop, plop. However, the sect master's subordinates only responded by kneeling. Pooh! The sect master watched as the remaining 10 martial emperors did not listen to him. They all knelt before Yi Hao. He could no longer hold back and vomited a mouthful of blood. Seeing the sect master vomit blood, none of the hundreds of thousands of disciples wanted to help him. Only then did the sect leader realize that he had become a loner in a moment of carelessness. The old ancestor will not let you off. The sect master's eyes were filled with anger as he pointed at everyone and cursed. Rumble! Suddenly, there was a loud sound. A figure fell from the sky and smashed into the ground, creating a deep pit. Dust filled the sky. Everyone quickly looked at the falling figure. When the dust settled, the figure in the deep pit was covered in blood and his face was facing down. However, everyone recognized him because of his red robe. Old ancestor. Seeing the old ancestor in the deep pit, the sect master immediately flew over. It's over. It's over. It's completely over. Seeing that the old ancestor was no longer breathing, the sect master looked as if he had lost his soul. Master, Zhang Fei did not disappoint you. At this moment, Zhang Fei also landed from the sky. Are you all right? Seeing that there were no injuries on Zhang Fei's body, Yi Hao asked with concern. Zhang Fei immediately shook his head and opened his palm. 2 dots of light, one black and one gold, appeared. At this moment, the gold dot was still struggling. It was the blood demon ancestor's soul. Unexpectedly, Zhang Fei had captured him alive. Seeing the blood demon ancestor's soul, a black shadow suddenly flashed beside the kneeling martial emperor. It was the Baiwustian battle beast. At this moment, the Baiwustian battle beast was staring at the blood demon ancestor's soul. Although the blood demon ancestor was already dead, his soul still had consciousness. When he sensed the fiery gaze, he immediately looked at the Baiwustian battle beast and immediately shivered. He naturally knew that the Baiwustian battle beast wanted to devour him. If he was devoured, he would really be finished. The blood demon ancestor struggled even more fiercely. Seeing the blood demon ancestor's soul, Yi Hao wanted to refine the blood demon ancestor's soul into a sky battle beast. Where could he find a sky battle beast that was at the peak of the martial saint realm? Yi Hao immediately sensed the sky spirit. The sky spirit immediately flew out of his eyes with excitement and nervousness. Just as Yi Hao thought that the sky spirit would pounce on the blood demon ancestor's soul, something unexpected happened. The sky spirit actually pounced on the ball of black light. Seeing the sky spirit pounce on it, the ball of black light also started to tremble. At the same time, it released a threatening aura towards the sky spirit. The sky spirit immediately stopped in its tracks, as if it was looking at Yi Hao pitifully. Yi Hao immediately understood what it meant. The aura on his body surged and immediately locked onto the ball of black light, making it unable to move. Seeing that the black light couldn't move, the sky spirit immediately revealed a trace of complacency towards the black light. Then, it pounced on the black light. The black light still wanted to struggle. However, under Yi Hao's suppression, it couldn't resist at all. The sky spirit successfully devoured the black light. Although its body rolled and kicked the blood demon ancestor's soul in front of the Baiwustian battle beast, it still couldn't move. Chapter 435. Actually, Yi Hao wanted to turn the blood demon ancestor into a sky battle beast. That way, he would have two martial saint level sky battle beasts. However, if he gave the blood demon ancestor's soul to Baiwu Sky battle beast to devour, it would be good if Baiwu Sky battle beast could break through a few levels. If not, he would suffer a great loss. Master. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang in Yi Hao's mind. Yi Hao looked at the sky spirit in shock. You can actually speak. That's right, Master. I devoured that sky spirit and gained intelligence. However, I need to sleep to digest it. The sky spirit's voice rang in Yi Hao's mind. Currently, I don't have the strength to refine the blood demon ancestor's soul. However, little one can retain all of the blood demon ancestor's power. The sky spirit continued. I see. Hearing that Baiwu Sky battle beast could retain all of the blood demon ancestor's power, Yi Hao was no longer worried. However, the sky spirit being able to gain intelligence was definitely a good thing for him. No, Master. I need to sleep. Before Yi Hao could react, the sky spirit immediately shot into Yi Hao's eyes. Little one, eat him. Yi Hao didn't know why the sky spirit gave Baiwu Sky battle beast such a name. However, it didn't matter. Hearing Yi Hao's words, little one instantly revealed a joyful expression. While the blood demon ancestor was struggling, he swallowed him. Boom! 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 Suddenly, little one's aura continuously broke through. 7th level Martial Saint. 8th level Martial Saint. 9th level Martial Saint. 10th level Martial Saint. Although he knew that little one could retain all of the blood demon ancestor's power. However, seeing little one's aura continuously rising, Yi Hao was a little envious. He had to admit that the sky battle beast was indeed powerful. It's not over yet. Yi Hao had originally thought that little one would at most break through to the peak of the martial saint realm. But at this moment, he realized that little one's breakthrough did not seem to have stopped. The aura on his body was still surging. The power of martial arts between heaven and earth was converging into a vortex. This is conferment of the gods. Seeing this, the Fire Emperor was extremely shocked as he spoke out uncertainly. At this moment, the color of the sky had changed, and the dark clouds in the sky were rapidly gathering together. As for the vortex formed by the power of the martial way, it spun rapidly under the dark clouds. Everyone felt as if the air had already condensed, making it hard for them to breathe. Everyone looked at the sky in a daze. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky. At this moment, the entire Myriad Kingdom continent was in an uproar. It had been tens of thousands of years. It had been tens of thousands of years. It had been too long since the Myriad Kingdom continent had ascended to godhood. The martial artists were all wondering if the upper realm had abandoned them. However, the rare phenomenon of the heavens and earth caused their hearts to become restless once again. All the experts were looking at the sky. If nothing unexpected happened, as long as this person succeeded in becoming a god, his name would definitely resound throughout the Myriad Kingdom continent. Which force is this? It's been tens of thousands of years, and he's about to become a god all of a sudden. It's unbelievable. In the direction of the Holy Blood Demon cult, could it be that the Blood Demon ancestor is going to forcefully break through? Just as everyone was discussing spiritedly, the thick dark clouds in the sky began to show signs of dissipating. The power of the martial wave vortex under the dark clouds also stopped condensing and showed signs of collapsing. Not good, this person's cultivation is not enough and has no strength to continue. It seems like he's going to fail. A voice exploded in the sky. Hearing this voice, all the experts' expressions immediately changed. They immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, God Emperor Zong. Rise." God Emperor Zong's voice carried a gentle force. Everyone felt as if their minds were suddenly enlightened, and their realms began to loosen. This was the power of a martial god. One sentence was enough to make everyone calm down. Forget it. It's been a long time since the Myriad Kingdom continent has ascended to godhood. I'll help you. God Emperor Zong suddenly sighed. Just as everyone was puzzled, the power of heaven and earth in Yi Hao's direction suddenly increased and quickly flowed into Little One's body, helping him stabilize his realm. Because the distance is too far, I can only help you to this extent. God Emperor Zong's voice rang out. However, compared to before, his voice was much weaker. It was obvious that his actions had consumed a lot of his energy. Little One's aura gradually stabilized, and the dark clouds in the sky returned to normal. God Emperor Zong is indeed a good person. Suddenly, a sarcastic voice rang out. Since you're helping him, don't mind me helping you too. Then, the power of heaven and earth in Yi Hao's direction surged again. However, this time, the power of heaven and earth surged into the dark clouds in the sky. After the dark clouds received the power of heaven and earth, they instantly went berserk and thunder rumbled. It was incomparably terrifying. Many demonic beasts prostrated themselves on the ground, scared out of their wits. Mushindiyu, how dare you be so vicious? Do you know the consequences of this? God Emperor Zong's furious voice rang out. One had to know that the difficulty of breaking through from the peak of the martial saint realm to the first order martial emperor realm was not the breakthrough in cultivation. The moment one broke through, one had to undergo the lightning tribulation, and for those who broke through to the first order martial emperor realm, it was almost impossible for them to survive the lightning tribulation. Now, Mu Shindi was actually channeling his power into the dark clouds. Without a doubt, this would increase the power of the lightning tribulation. This was undoubtedly extremely vicious. Ha ha ha, isn't it just his soul being destroyed? What's the big deal? But what's interesting is that even God Emperor Zong can get angry. But so what? Mu Shindi mocked proudly. Mu Shindi. Yi Hao gritted his teeth in anger towards Mu Shindi. He had no enmity with Mu Shindi, but Mu Shindi treated Little One in such a manner. If anything happened to Little One, he would not let this Mu Shindi off so easily. Master, what should we do? Looking at the chaotic lightning tribulation in the sky, the Fire Emperor asked anxiously. Yi Hao furrowed his brows. Master, let me help him. Zhang Fei stepped forward and said. You can't. The Fire Emperor hurriedly tried to stop him. This is the lightning tribulation. The more people there are, the stronger the lightning tribulation. If your master helps, it will backfire. All of a sudden, Yi Hao thought of something. Since God Emperor Zong could channel his power to Little One, why couldn't he? Thinking up to this point, Yi Hao turned to the disciples of the Blood Demon sect and said, If you want to live, channel your power into his body. Seeing so many disciples, Yi Hao was afraid that something might happen. He didn't forget to warn them, if anything happens to him, none of you will live. Begin. Hearing Yi Hao's words, none of the disciples dared to hesitate. In order to survive, all of them went all out and channeled their power into Little One's body. Although the disciples' power was not even a 10,000th of God Emperor Zong's, it was still more than enough. However, the strength in numbers was great and streams converged to form a river. Chapter 436. Sigh, this person is really unlucky. Originally, with the help of God Emperor Zong, he definitely had a high chance of becoming a god. But now, it seems that he is doomed. At this time, the lightning tribulation has at least doubled. However, the difficulty and power has definitely increased countless times. Everyone disperse. The outcome has been decided. There's nothing more to see. After Mu Shindi made a move, everyone started to discuss. No one was optimistic about Little One anymore. In their opinion, there were 3 lightning tribulations. Now that Mu Shindi made a move, it would probably be doubled. It would be good if Little One could survive the first 3 lightning tribulations. There was no need to even think about the lightning tribulations after that. Rumble. Suddenly, the dark clouds in the sky rolled and the sound of thunder shook. It's about to start, someone said. From the dark clouds, a golden lightning bolt as thick as a baby's arm shot out. The golden lightning illuminated the entire sky. It seemed to split the sky as it struck down. Quickly dodge. Seeing that the lightning tribulation had begun, the Fire Emperor immediately shouted in fear. Hundreds of thousands of disciples were scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. They had long wanted to leave, but because they were afraid of Yi Hao, they did not dare to move. When they heard the Fire Emperor's order, it was as if they had received an imperial edict. They immediately spread their legs and fled in all directions. Little One, you must hold on. Looking at Little One, who was like a shadow, Yi Hao said nervously in his heart. After all, if there were no accidents, Little One would be his first martial god. Having a martial god as a subordinate, it would definitely be a very good feeling. Furthermore, how could Yi Hao bear to see his subordinate die in front of his eyes? Seeing that the golden lightning was about to strike, Yi Hao immediately left the range of the lightning tribulation. Rumble. The golden lightning finally struck Little One's body. Little One moved slightly, allowing the lightning tribulation to strike his body. Suddenly, the golden lightning exploded on Little One's body with a dazzling light. Soon, the golden lightning dissipated and Little One was actually standing in his original position, safe and sound. He passed. Seeing that Little One had passed through the golden lightning so easily, Yi Hao heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing that the golden lightning was still gathering in the sky, the experts of the Myriad Kingdom continent weren't surprised. After all, with God Emperor Zong's help, if Little One couldn't even survive the first bolt of golden lightning, then it could only be said that Little One was too useless. As expected, Little One successfully passed through the 3 bolts of golden lightning. At this moment, everyone's hearts were truly raised. Because they knew that the following was the true highlight of the show. Whether the path of martial arts would disappear or become a god in one go would depend on the following event. Rumble! A golden lightning bolt as thick as 2 adult men's arms fell from the sky. Compared to this, the previous 3 bolts of golden lightning were just appetizers. At this moment, Yi Hao's heart was in his throat again. When he sensed the destructive power within the golden lightning, Yi Hao had a feeling that if he had been the one to bear the brunt of the golden lightning, he would have been reduced to nothingness. And little one couldn't speak, so Yi Hao wasn't sure what was going on with little one. Yi Hao wasn't sure if little one would be able to hold on. In the blink of an eye, the golden lightning struck little one's body. Yi Hao only saw the golden lightning bolt, about the size of little one's head, strike little one's head. However, Yi Hao couldn't see clearly what was going on with little one. Yi Hao saw that little one, who had been able to deal with it easily at the beginning, was now trembling violently. Phew! He held on. Seeing the golden lightning dissipate, Yi Hao finally heaved a sigh of relief. He actually passed through the 4th bolt of golden lightning. At this moment, the powerhouses of the Myriad Kingdom continent were all extremely shocked when they saw that the dark clouds hadn't dispersed. Humph, that dog's life is really tough. At this moment, Mu Shindi's unhappy voice rang out. It was as if he was very disappointed that little one hadn't been killed by the golden lightning. This showed how selfish and overbearing he was. Not to mention others, even some of the righteous powerhouses were a little angry when they heard this. However, none of them dared to say anything. After all, no one was willing to help a dying person and offend a god-emperor who was already at the martial god realm. And at this moment, when Yi Hao heard Mu Shindi's voice, he was even more furious. Little one had no enmity with him. What right did he have to want to kill little one? Yi Hao memorized this voice in his mind. Rumble! At this moment, an even thicker golden lightning was condensing in the sky. I don't believe that you still have the life to persevere. As if little one had some deep hatred for him, Mu Shindi's voice rang out again. Mu Shindi, don't you think that's a little too much? At this moment, God Emperor Zong couldn't stand it anymore and said in a slightly angry tone. Humph, he's just an ant. What's too much about that? Mu Shindi's disdainful voice rang out. God Emperor Zong still wanted to say something, but the golden lightning had already struck. At this moment, God Emperor Zong was also sweating. After all, as a martial artist, he was very willing to see the human race prosper. At this moment, if there was another martial god, it would definitely be a great help to the human race. However, it seemed like everyone's heart was different. Mu Shindi's heart was the opposite of his. Mu Shindi didn't want to see anyone break through to become a martial god. This was because Mu Shindi only had eyes for himself. After all, a martial god was the ruler of this world. In Mu Shindi's opinion, with another martial god, there would definitely be a share of the resources. Little one, hang in there. Yi Hao was extremely nervous. The golden lightning struck little one's body once again. At this moment, it was obvious that little one couldn't hold on any longer. He had already started to use his martial strength. Little one managed to survive the 5th golden lightning strike. If little one had a human body at this moment, it would have been obvious that little one's body was badly damaged. However, at this moment, everyone could see that little one's aura was much weaker than it had been before. Moreover, little one had directly knelt on the ground. Little one rested for a moment before crawling up with difficulty and preparing to face the 6th golden lightning strike. Whoosh! He had actually survived the 5th golden lightning strike. At this moment, everyone could already imagine the expression on Mu Shindi's face at this moment. This was a blatant slap to the face. Mu Shindi kept saying that little one would definitely die, but little one had already survived the 5th golden lightning strike. He will definitely die. Mu Shindi was silent for a moment before he suddenly shouted angrily. In the sky, another wave of martial strength was condensed. It was obvious that Little One had survived the 5th golden lightning strike in a row. This made Mu Shindi feel like he had been slapped in the face. He was Mu Shindi, an existence that countless people admired. Whatever he said was the truth. No one could disobey him. Therefore, when he said that Little One would definitely die, it was a gift to Little One. However, Little One didn't know what was good for him, so he definitely couldn't let Little One become a martial god. Therefore, Mu Shindi no longer cared. He wanted to channel more martial strength into the lightning strike. He didn't need anything else now. He just wanted Little One to fail the tribulation and be destroyed. Mu Shindi, that's enough. At this moment, God Emperor Zong roared. The same wave of power dispersed Mu Shindi's power. God Emperor Zong, you dare to stop me? Aren't you afraid that I will attack your Zong Xing dynasty? Mu Shindi couldn't help but threaten when his power was dispersed. Chapter 437. Emperor God Zong knew that although he wanted to be a good person, he had gone too far. But God Emperor Mu had gone too far. If he were to lower his tone now, it would be the same as showing weakness to God Emperor Mu. That would have a negative impact on his reputation. Rumble! At this moment, the last bolt of golden lightning finally landed under everyone's nervous gazes. Whoosh! Seeing the bucket-sized golden lightning in the sky, everyone was shocked. This was twice the size of the 5th bolt of golden lightning. Could it be that even the heavens wanted this person to die and not let him pass the tribulation successfully? Ha ha ha! Seeing the huge lightning in the sky, Mu Shindi couldn't help but laugh proudly. Looks like I don't have to do anything. Even the heavens won't let him off. It's over. How can it be so strong? Emperor God Zong's expression changed when he saw the lightning. Previously, Little One couldn't even condense the lightning tribulation. Relying on the martial arts power he transferred to him was definitely not enough. Emperor God Zong couldn't help but regret helping Little One in the first place. That was because Little One would, at most, lose the chance to pass the tribulation temporarily. Perhaps he would have a chance to pass the tribulation in the future if he had a good foundation. But because he helped Little One, Mu Shindi interfered. If Little One failed the tribulation now, he would definitely face death. Then he wouldn't have any chance of survival. Therefore, Emperor God Zong was actually blaming himself. Just as the golden lightning was about to hit Little One, nearly 1,000 black lights shot out from Yi Hao's eyes. Upon closer inspection, they were sky-een battle beasts. At this moment, the sky-een battle beasts rushed toward Little One. It was as if the two were communicating. Little One hesitated for a moment, then suddenly opened his mouth. Nearly 1,000 sky-een battle beasts turned into black lights and shot into Little One's mouth. Yi Hao was also shocked. He didn't expect that these puppet-like sky-een battle beasts would be willing to sacrifice themselves at this critical moment to help Little One. Nearly 1,000 sky-een battle beasts chose to die and turn themselves into Little One's power. Hiss! Little One swallowed all the sky-een battle beasts in the blink of an eye and let out an ear-piercing cry. Yi Hao looked carefully and realized that there were 2 drops of something that looked like tears on Little One's face. Boom! The bucket-like golden lightning struck Little One's body. Hiss! Little One let out another ear-piercing cry, as if he was declaring war with the golden lightning. In the end, Jean Lei was defeated, and Little One was able to hold on until the end. However, Little One, who had always been like a shadow, was now visibly weak. God Emperor Mu, you and I can't live under the same sky. Yi Hao couldn't help but roar when he felt Little One's vitality slowly dissipating. It was all because of God Emperor Mu that things had turned out this way. If it wasn't Shindi, Little One would have succeeded to break through to the tribulation. If it wasn't for God Emperor Mu, the 1,000 sky-een battle beasts wouldn't have died. If it wasn't for Mu Shindi, Little One's life force wouldn't have dissipated and he wouldn't have faced death. Therefore, Yi Hao was furious. His hatred for Mu Shindi had also reached its peak. The 6 golden lightning bolts had ended. The tribulation lightning seemed to have released all its lightning power. The dark clouds in the sky, which were so heavy that it was hard to breathe, started to disperse rapidly. The whirlpool of martial power was actually condensing, as if it was about to turn into water. It was clear that the martial power had already condensed to a certain degree. Yi Hao didn't understand what the whirlpool of martial power was for. The whirlpool of martial power suddenly seemed to be attracted by some mysterious force and surged into Little One's body. Little One, who was about to lose his life force, was forced to accept the influx of martial power into his body. Phew, Little One is saved. Yi Hao heaved a sigh of relief. Based on the information he had read, the whirlpool of martial power was currently transforming Little One's body. This meant that Little One had succeeded in his tribulation. As long as he succeeded, Little One wouldn't die. Moreover, with the help of the whirlpool of martial power, Little One would completely transform into a first-order martial god. Moreover, Little One would undergo a qualitative transformation. At this time, Little One was at the center of the whirlpool, surrounded by the whirlpool of martial power. He actually succeeded. How is this possible? What exactly happened? How could he succeed? I'm not dreaming, right? He actually succeeded. This is too unbelievable. At this time, everyone looked at the dissipating dark clouds and the whirlpool of martial power in the sky, which was spinning rapidly. Everyone was shocked, and their voices were filled with disbelief. No. This is impossible. Mu Shindi's furious voice sounded. An existence that was merely an ant in his eyes. Yet, Little One had persevered time and time again, and even succeeded in ascending to godhood. How could he accept this? One had to know that although the golden lightning was terrifying, the more golden lightning one experienced, the greater the danger one would receive. However, the benefits were the same. As long as one succeeded in the end, the more golden lightning one experienced, the more benefits one would receive. Not to mention other things, just the nourishment of the whirlpool of martial power was enough to transform Little One, allowing him to have a higher starting point than others. Moreover, his cultivation in the future would be faster than others. One had to know that when Mu Shindi experienced 4 golden lightning strikes, he was already extremely arrogant. However, compared to Little One's current experience, it paled in comparison. This person must not be allowed to live. No matter what the reason was, Mu Shindi knew that Little One could not be allowed to live. Otherwise, if Little One was allowed to grow, it would be like nurturing a tiger that would invite calamity. Moreover, because of Little One, he had been humiliated in front of the entire continent. He had slapped himself in the face time and time again. Just based on this point alone, he had to kill Little One to wash away his shame. Because he had been in this position for a long time. Mu Shindi was already used to being overbearing and arrogant. He would not think about it. Little One did not provoke him at all, nor did he take the initiative to get involved in this matter. Instead, it was him who kept finding trouble with Little One. However, he would not think about it, nor did he care to think about it. He only knew that he could not stand Little One, so Little One had to die. Moreover, no one could stop him. Whoever dared to stop him, he would destroy them. Moreover, he would not only kill Little One, he would also destroy all life related to Little One. If there was anyone to blame, blame Little One. Who asked Little One to steal the limelight, steal his limelight, and even succeed in ascending to godhood. He wanted to slay a god. He wanted the entire continent to know that he, Mu Shindi, was not to be trifled with. Moreover, Little One had not yet grown. At this time, it was the best time to kill Little One. Moreover, he could not bear it for a moment longer. If he did not kill Little One, he would feel uncomfortable. Chapter 438. Everyone understood that Mu Shindi was really determined to kill this time. Mu Shindi actually dared to say such words in front of everyone. Mu Shindi had no room for regret. After all, as a martial god, What he cared about was his prestige. Mu Shindi had already reached the martial god realm. He was a veteran martial god tens of thousands of years ago. A veteran martial god tens of thousands of years ago against a new martial god. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for obtaining the first martial god realm powerhouse. You are rewarded with the right to summon randomly. After Xiao Yi successfully passed the tribulation, the system notification sounded. Random summon? Yi Hao didn't understand when he heard the system's notification. What did this random summon mean? Random summon. You can summon a general at will. The level of the summon is random and the time of use is random. Yi Hao was speechless when he saw this. This random summon didn't seem to be very useful. If the summon general was a low-level martial artist, it wouldn't be of any help to him. Most importantly, the time of use of the summon was random. In other words, the summon general might have a time limit. It could be a day, a second, or a minute. Does the host want to use the chance? The system prompted again. Yes. Although he didn't have much hope, it was useless to keep it. Yi Hao also wanted to take a gamble. If he could summon a martial sage, it wouldn't be a loss. Immediately, Yi Hao saw the system's red light flashing. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for summoning Huang Zhong. His strength is at the peak of the martial god realm. You can use him for 10 minutes. What? Peak of the martial god realm? Yi Hao, who didn't have much hope, was ecstatic when he heard about the peak of the martial god realm. He didn't expect his luck to be so good that he could summon a peak of the martial god realm. However, when he heard that there was a time limit, Yi Hao couldn't help but feel disappointed. However, if he could use it for 10 minutes, he could do a lot of things. Use the summon, Yi Hao immediately said to the system. A red light flashed and a young man holding a longbow appeared in front of Yi Hao. Yi Hao realized that when the system summoned generals, it seemed to only summon young people and even made them look younger. Die. Mu Shindi's voice suddenly rang out in the air. This was the strength of a martial god expert. They could shrink the ground into an inch, and they could also kill people from thousands of miles away. Everyone raised their heads in astonishment and looked at the huge palm in the sky. Mu Shindi made his move. Everyone had the same thought at the same time as they looked at the gigantic palm flying through the air. No one dared to look at it in fear. Huang Zhong. Yi Hao immediately looked at Huang Zhong. Kill this man. Mu Shindi had provoked him time and time again. Yi Hao was already boiling with anger. Now that he had summoned Huang Zhong, he could not let Mu Shindi off so easily. Huang Zhong didn't say anything. He only nodded slightly and drew the golden bow in his hand. What shocked Yi Hao was that Huang Zhong did not use an arrow. Instead, he pulled the bowstring. The power of the martial way between heaven and earth quickly condensed into a sharp arrow that appeared on the golden bow. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, a sharp arrow formed by the power of the martial way soared into the sky and shot toward the gigantic palm. That was not the end. Huang Zhong drew the golden bow again, and a sharp arrow formed by the power of the martial way was formed again. However, this time, Huang Zhong did not release the bowstring so quickly. The sharp arrow continued to absorb the power of the martial way between heaven and earth, as well as the power of the martial way in Huang Zhong's body. What's that sound? Other than the rumbling sound coming from the giant palm, there were other sounds coming from the sky. Everyone looked around. What was that? An arrow. It was an arrow. They looked at the inconspicuous arrow compared to the gigantic palm. Everyone did not understand what was going on. Could it be the new Emperor God? That martial god specializes in archery. Someone guessed. However, everyone started to mock him. After all, although the arrow looked extremely powerful, it was not worth mentioning when compared to the gigantic palm. Mu Shindi is indeed a veteran martial god. This new martial god cannot be compared to him. Many people started to discuss the comparison between the gigantic palm and the arrow. Boom! The gigantic palm and the arrow finally collided. However, the scene of the arrow being easily destroyed by the gigantic palm did not happen. After the collision between the gigantic palm and the arrow, there was a loud explosion and a dazzling white light. After that, the arrow and the gigantic palm disappeared at the same time. Everyone had forgotten about their discussion. No matter how they thought about it, they couldn't understand how the seemingly fragile arrow could be on par with the giant palm. "Who dares to stop me?" Mu Shindi's arrogant voice was heard when his attack was blocked. He did not believe that someone would be able to stop him. In his opinion, the person who could stop his attack was definitely not a new martial god. Even if that person was not on par with him, he was probably not far off. Could it be Emperor Godzong? Someone guessed. "How dare you stop me? Aren't you afraid of the divine union?" Mu Shindi's voice was heard again. His tone was full of arrogance. It was clear that he had confidence in the divine union. Divine union? Could Mu Shindi have joined the divine union? Everyone was shocked when they heard Mu Shindi's words. The full name of the divine union was the Four Evil Spirits. It was formed by the North, South, East and West Evil Spirit. The strength of the four evil spirits was at the peak of the martial god realm. The four evil spirits were very famous in the Myriad Kingdom continent. They were also one of the few top forces. If they could become a top force, the conditions to join them would be very harsh. Besides having to pay a huge entrance fee, one also had to consider one's talent and cultivation base. The lowest requirement was to be a martial god. Even so, it was extremely difficult to join the four evil spirit. Basically, joining the four evil spirits was equivalent to having a protective talisman. One would be able to do whatever one wanted in the Myriad Kingdom continent. After all, if one offended a member of the four evil spirits, one would have to consider whether one could withstand the fury of the four evil spirits. Therefore, many martial gods were trying their best to enter the four demons' divine alliance. Mu Shindi had also spent a lot of effort to join the four evil spirit. Therefore, mentioning the four evil spirits was enough to make him proud. Indeed, many powerhouses felt envious and respectful towards Mu Shindi when they heard this. After all, becoming a member of the four evil spirits meant that Mu Shindi had hopes of reaching the peak of the martial god realm in the future. Swoosh! Another sharp arrow pierced through the air, interrupting everyone's train of thought. The powerhouses realized that this arrow was more than 3 times longer than the previous one. Its speed was also much faster. Even the martial gods could only vaguely see the arrow's silhouette. He had actually made another move. Everyone was in an uproar. No one had expected that this person would still dare to make a move after Mu Shindi had mentioned the four evil spirit. Could it be that this person wasn't afraid of the four evil spirits? "You are courting death." Mu Shindi snorted coldly. Suddenly, a huge shadow appeared in the sky. The shadow's appearance could be seen clearly. It was a middle-aged man with a face full of arrogance and eyes full of rage. Chapter 439. Mu Shindi raised his right hand and was about to grab the arrow. Poochie! What was even more shocking was that the sharp arrow actually pierced through Mu Shindi's palm and continued to shoot forward. Oh my god! What kind of expert was this? It was actually so abnormal. Everyone thought at the same time. They were extremely shocked that Mu Shindi's palm was actually pierced through by the arrow even though he had already turned into a shadow. Ah! Suddenly, a panic scream was heard. Everyone carefully identified the voice and realized that it actually came from Mu Shindi. Rumble! Suddenly, the sky changed drastically and the sky was filled with dark clouds. Upon closer inspection, one would realize that the dark clouds were actually blood red. Blood clouds. Seeing the blood clouds in the sky, everyone knew what had happened. However, no one dared to think about it. The martial god had fallen and the blood clouds had appeared. As long as the blood clouds appeared in the sky, it meant that a martial god had fallen. Could it be that Mu Shindi had fallen? Everyone thought of Mu Shindi's last cry, and everyone thought of a terrifying possibility. How could Mu Shindi, who was incomparably arrogant at the beginning, fall in the blink of an eye? Suddenly, blood rain fell from the sky, and the blood rain carried a dense martial Tao power. This blood rain was Mu Shindi's lifetime cultivation. Mu Shindi's cultivation was obtained from the Myriad Kingdom continent. Now that he was dead, his cultivation naturally had to be fed back to the Myriad Kingdom continent. The blood rain dripped onto the ground and instantly disappeared without a trace. However, even more experts were frantically avoiding the blood rain. Because at this moment, the blood rain was filled with Mu Shindi's unwillingness, anger, and resentment before his death. Whoever was stained by the blood rain would, after all, affect their mind and have a great impact on their future cultivation. Many experts were feeling extremely complicated at this moment. In one day, they had witnessed the power of the martial god. At the same time, they had also witnessed the terror of the lightning tribulation. They had also witnessed Mu Shindi's arrogance. They had also witnessed the fall of a martial god expert with their own eyes. All of this seemed so unrealistic. In their opinion, a martial god expert was so mysterious and so unattainable that they yearned for it so much. However, for them to witness the fall of a martial god expert with their own eyes made them unable to accept it. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for killing a fourth-order martial god expert. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 400 million experience points and 40 million soul points. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a special gift pack reward. Hearing the voice in his mind, Yi Hao finally vented the anger in his heart. Although it was to kill him was to kill him so quickly, Yi to his heart to kill him. My lord, my time is almost up, Huang Zhong suddenly said. Yi Hao did not expect 10 minutes to pass so quickly. That was a peak martial god realm expert. Yi Hao was very reluctant to let him go just like that. If he dared to be arrogant, he would have killed him with a single arrow. However, this also stimulated Yi Hao's desire to summon a peak martial god expert as soon as possible. After witnessing the power of Huang Zhong's arrow, Yi Hao realized that his strength was still far from enough. Not to mention anything else, just the 4 evil spirits that Mu Shindi had mentioned was enough for him to deal with carefully. If all of you swear allegiance to me, I can spare your lives. Yi Hao knew that this was not a place to stay for long, so his gaze swept over the crowd. If he let these hundreds of thousands of disciples leave, it would undoubtedly be very dangerous for him. He was still too weak, so he had to be careful. Not to mention anything else, even a third-order martial god expert would be troublesome for him. We are willing to swear the oath. Originally, for cultivators, no one was willing to swear an oath unless they had no other choice. However, to Yi Hao's surprise, these hundreds of thousands of disciples were very straightforward, kneeling on the ground and swearing the oath. Yi Hao saw the respect in everyone's eyes, then looked at Huang Zhong, and instantly understood what was going on. Don't, I also swear, don't kill me. At this time, the sect leader looked at Yi Hao, who was closing in on him step by step, and his heart was filled with regret. Yi Hao's backhand slashed, directly killing the sect leader. Because some people could be forgiven, but some people were not worthy of your forgiveness. Not to mention anything else, the sect leader deserved to be cut into pieces for the dead soldiers of the Fire Dragon Empire and the innocent civilians of the 4 cities. Find a place to settle yourselves first. When the situation stabilizes, I will send people to find you. Yi Hao said to the hundreds of thousands of disciples. If these disciples were to rush into the Fire Dragon Empire at this time, they would definitely expose the Fire Dragon Empire to everyone's eyes. At this time, the Fire Dragon Empire was still too weak. Obviously, doing so would do more harm than good. Yi Hao could only temporarily disperse this group of people. At this time, Everyone had already sworn the oath, so they were naturally loyal and devoted to Yi Hao. They obeyed Yi Hao's words and immediately left in all directions. As a saint-level force, the Holy Blood Demon Church naturally had abundant resources. Yi Hao did not waste them and took them all away. Then, Yi Hao destroyed the Holy Blood Demon Church with a palm strike. The previously famous Holy Blood Demon Church also announced that they would leave the stage of history. The news of Mu Shindi's death naturally spread to the ears of all forces. After all, there were only a few experts who had witnessed this scene. After all, the myriad kingdom continent was too big, so big that it was shocking. Mu Shindi's death naturally caused an uproar in the entire continent and attracted the attention of all the experts. Everyone was curious as to who had done it. Some of the smaller forces were thinking of ways to rope in Little One. And even more top forces wanted to know who had killed Mu Shindi. The person who could kill Mu Shindi was the target of all the major forces. At this time, the four evil spirits had already released the news that they would mobilize the entire alliance to kill this person. Unless this person repented of his mistakes and joined the four evil spirits to atone for his sins, they would spare his life. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the four evil spirits were also tempted by Huang Zhong. After all, they would naturally be happy to obtain a stronger subordinate for the death of one person. Moreover, the four evil spirits, in order to prevent Huang Zhong from falling into the hands of other forces, they had already issued a warning. Whoever dared to accept Huang Zhong would be an enemy of the four evil spirits. The four evil spirits extracted Huang Zhong's aura from Mu Shindi's body and began to hunt him down all over the world. Of course, they would not search one by one. After all, the myriad kingdom continent was so big, how long would it take for them to search? Their target was a martial god realm expert. The most important thing was to use bows and arrows. One had to know that bows and arrows were considered unorthodox among the weapons that martial artists cultivated. Therefore, the target range was narrowed even more. The four evil spirits had already released the news that they would search for Huang Zhong's identity within a day. Chapter 440. Everyone, a young man from the four evil spirits has been killed. What do you think? Inside the East Evil Divine Hall, there were dozens of shadows. Each of them was a peak martial god. These shadows were the projections of some of the controllers of the four evil spirits. The East Evil Spirit sat on the Alliance leader's throne and asked. Although the East Evil Spirit looked old, his eyes shone brightly as he scanned the crowd. No one said a word. If you don't say anything, I will. My men have found an important clue. Seeing that no one spoke, the East Evil Spirit spoke. Everyone's eyes lit up as they looked at the East Evil Spirit. Alliance leader, what is the clue? The West Evil Spirit asked. Among those present, only the South, West and North Evil Spirits dared to ask the East Evil Spirit directly. Although the others were peak martial gods, they were no match for the East Evil Spirit. Hence, they were full of respect and fear for the East Evil Spirit. Do you remember the aura of the devouring demon god that appeared some time ago? The East Evil Spirit did not mention the incident directly but asked instead. The crowd was confused. They did not understand why the East Evil Spirit would bring this up. The incident of the devouring demon god's aura had shaken the entire continent. However, there was still no news about it. The devouring demonic god seemed to have disappeared into thin air. If not for the fact that many people had sensed the aura of the devouring demonic god back then, the devouring demonic god would have died. If not for the devouring demon god's aura, everyone would have thought that they had sensed wrongly. My men have discovered a few similar auras in two places. The East Sha god continued to speak. Could it be the devouring demon god? But the devouring demon god could not have grown so quickly. Moreover, Mu Shindi did not have the aura of the devouring demon god in his body. The West Evil Spirit was confused. Do you know that the person who became a god came from the Holy Blood Demon Church? My men found the aura of the devouring demon god at the place where the devouring demon god appeared and at the Holy Blood Demon Church. Although the aura was weak, it was not important. But that's not important because there's another aura that appeared in both places. Could it be that this incident is really related to the devouring demon god or the devouring demon god becoming a god? No, my men also found the aura of the Sky beast at the Holy Blood Demon Church. What? Hearing the East Shah god's words, everyone stood up in shock. Without a doubt, this news was a 1-pound bomb. One must know that if there was a heavenly beast, there would be a heavenly spirit. In the Myriad Kingdom continent, the influence of the heavenly spirit was not weaker than that of the devouring demon god. Because these two were existences that had set off a bloody storm in the Myriad Kingdom continent. Moreover, each of their hands was stained with the blood of billions of people. Looks like the Myriad Kingdom continent is going to be in chaos. Suddenly, someone sighed. Everyone looked over and realized that the person who sighed was actually the Western Fiend God. The faces of the others all turned extremely ugly at this moment. After all, the devouring demon god from tens of thousands of years ago was enough to give them a headache. Now there was the heavenly spirit. The two added together made everyone feel even more troubled. Moreover, the growth rate of the devouring demon god and the heavenly spirit was insane. If the heavenly spirit and the devouring demon god were to grow, the first thing that would be affected would be their interest. And this time, the one to be conferred as a god is the lunar war beast? Seeing that everyone's expressions were not good, the East Shah god threw out another heavy bomb. What? Everyone looked as if they had eaten a dead fly. They had never thought that the last person to be conferred as a god in the Myriad Kingdom continent would be the lunar war beast. God Emperor Zong. Damn it. Suddenly, the Western Fiend god opened his mouth and said, "That's right. Without this god Emperor Zong, the lunar war beast would not have been able to successfully confer as a god." The Northern Fiend god also opened his mouth. "Alliance Master, give the order to kill this god Emperor Zong as a warning to others." The Southern Fiend god also opened his mouth and said, "Alliance Master, please give the order." At this moment, the rest of the people all stood up and said. The Eastern Fiend god pondered for a moment and said, "Allow. Announce to the world that God Emperor Zong colluded with outsiders and his 9 generations will be exterminated. Whoever dares to help him will be punished for treason. It will be carried out in a month." "Yes, Alliance Master," everyone said in unison. As for Mu Shindi, maintain the rank of his clansmen. Within 100 years, if anyone can enter the martial god realm, they can still join the 4 evil spirits. The Eastern Fiend god's words immediately made those who wanted to take over Mu Shindi's forces not dare to act rashly. However, the 100 years was only a superficial explanation to the Mu Shindi clan. It meant that he would protect them for 100 years. After 100 years, they would no longer be under his control. As for becoming a god within 100 years, don't even think about it. On the same day, the 4 evil spirits sent another message. However, this time, it was not the news that everyone had been waiting for. It was the news that Mu Shindi's clansmen were conferred as a god. Instead, the good old man God Emperor Zong was accused of colluding with outsiders. Everyone was stunned. They couldn't understand what was going on. God Emperor Zong's reputation as a good man was well known throughout the world. Just like yesterday, God Emperor Zong had helped a stranger to become a god. Everyone did not understand why such a good man would collude with outsiders. At this moment, God Emperor Zong's Zong Saint country was shrouded in a thick layer of dark clouds, especially the clansmen and descendants of God Emperor Zong. They could not lift their spirits. The person sitting on the throne was not the Zong Saint country's emperor, but God Emperor Zong. Old ancestor, the 4 evil spirits have gone too far. How dare they accuse me of colluding with outsiders? More importantly, why would I collude with outsiders? The Zong Saint country's emperor roared angrily. Old ancestor, what should we do now? Millions of our clansmen cannot die just like that. Old ancestor, please think of a way. Shut up! What kind of nonsense is this? God Emperor Zong shouted in dissatisfaction. Although God Emperor Zong was a peaceful person, when he got angry, his clansmen were very afraid. Like obedient babies, they shut their mouths obediently. This is very strange. I would never collude with outsiders. He had been in seclusion all this time. Therefore, God Emperor Zong knew that he would never collude with outsiders. However, the four fiends' divine union wouldn't pin the blame on him for no reason. Could it be because of Mu Shindi? God Emperor Zong thought of Mu Shindi's death. Could it be that the four evil spirits could not find the murderer, so they decided to target him? Do you think I'm a pushover? God Emperor Zong was furious. Damn. After all, who wouldn't be angry when their clansmen were about to be wiped out? How could his Zong clan be wiped out just like that? It had taken him so much effort to develop his Zong clan to such an extent. Thinking of this, God Emperor Zong took out a voice transmission talisman and transmitted his thoughts. I agree to your request. I will join you. God Emperor Zong had always been aloof from worldly affairs and did not want to get involved in these alliances, because he knew that there would be conflicts of interest if he joined the alliances. Therefore, many alliances tried to recruit him, but he rejected them. Chapter 441. For the sake of his legacy and his bloodline, God Emperor Zong had no choice but to agree. He wanted to use this as a safe haven? Usually, he would get a reply within seconds, but this time, he waited for a long time, but there was no reply. Crackle! Suddenly, the voice transmission talisman in his hand cracked. In the blink of an eye, it had shattered into pieces. Emperor God Zong's face turned green when he saw the shattered voice transmission talisman in his hand. There was only one possibility for the voice transmission talisman to shatter, and that was that the other party had cut off the communication between them. Emperor God Zong was not satisfied, so he took out a few more voice transmission talismans, but the results were the same. In the end, Emperor God Zong could only give up. The people he had contacted were all powerful factions, and if they were willing to do such a thing, the other smaller factions would definitely do the same. Emperor God Zong did not expect that these factions would try to win him over by promising him all sorts of benefit. He was just asking for help when he was in trouble, but they treated him like a plague and tried to distance themselves from him. Old ancestor, how is the situation? Emperor God Zong asked hesitantly when he saw Emperor God Zong's pale face. Select a few direct bloodline disciples and those who are talented. Send them out secretly. Emperor God Zong believed that no matter what happened, his bloodline could not be destroyed. When everyone heard Emperor God Zong's words, they knew that Emperor God Zong had already made his final decision. Yes. Emperor God Zong replied immediately. He had already prepared for this. Let the entire country disperse, and all of you escape if you can. Emperor God Zong sighed. We are willing to live and die with you, old ancestor. Emperor God Zong and everyone else shouted with red eyes. Go. This is my last order. Escape if you can. Remember to change your names when you escape. Don't think about revenge. Emperor God Zong said sternly, but he waved his hand sadly. He knew how powerful the four evil spirits were. Compared to them, Zong Xinguo was like an egg hitting a rock. The four evil spirits were too powerful. Zong Xinguo would not be able to fight back. If he stayed, he would just be throwing his life away. Ancestor, please escape with us. Everyone's faces were filled with reluctance as they roared with red eyes. Their target is me. If I escape, none of you will be able to escape. Zong Divine Lord sighed. There were many people in the Zong Xing dynasty. If all of them escaped, perhaps one or two of them would be able to escape. Furthermore, the direct descendants and talented clansmen would be able to take advantage of the chaos to escape. However, he knew very well that the four fiends' divine union would definitely not let him escape. Furthermore, the four evil spirits' forces were spread throughout every corner of the world. There was no way they would let him escape. Furthermore, even if he escaped, the four evil spirits would be able to easily track him down. Because if he were to escape, he would be slapping the faces of the four evil spirits. The four evil spirits would become the laughingstock of the entire world. Ancestor. Suddenly, under Emperor Zhongsheng's lead, everyone fell to their knees and cried out in grief. Let's go. Zong God Emperor waved his hand, unwilling to look at the crowd. Patriarch, take care. On the day the four evil spirits released the news, the entire Zhong-Xing dynasty chose to collapse. The billions of people in the Zhong-Xing dynasty had either escaped or left. It seemed like everyone wanted to leave this place. On the same day, there were rebels everywhere in the Zhong-Xing dynasty. Various powerful generals started to declare themselves as kings. Everyone was fighting for territory. This situation lasted for more than 20 days and the rebels were getting more and more aggressive. However, there was no news from Emperor Zong. Similarly, the imperial family of the Zhong-Xing dynasty had also fled. However, the four evil spirits did not make any move. Without a doubt, the four evil spirits had yet to make a move and the Zhong-Xing dynasty was already dead. At this time, the imperial city of the Zhong-Xing dynasty, which was originally able to accommodate close to 100 million people, had lost its former glory and was in ruins. At this time, a man was sitting on top of the imperial city's gate. It was Emperor Zong. No, martial arts cultivation is against the heavens. I cannot accept my fate. Emperor Zong, who had lost his will to fight and wanted to resign himself to fate, suddenly seemed to have understood something. Looking at the once prosperous imperial city that was now empty, Emperor Zong could not help but blame himself. At the same time, he was filled with hatred for the four evil spirits. He had no grudge against the four evil spirits. However, the four evil spirits were so ruthless. He could not take it anymore. However, he was too weak and could not kill the four evil spirits to seek justice. No, I have to escape. I have to live. Although escaping now was also a close shave, at least there was still a chance of survival. If the heavens gave him a chance, he would definitely kill the four evil spirits. No matter what, it was better than waiting for death here. My life is in my own hands, not the heavens. What right did the four evil spirits have to make me lose my will to fight and wait for death here? Suddenly, Emperor Zong realized that he had changed his decadence. Emperor Zong identified a direction and said, "The west is a low-level area. It is also filled with danger." In Emperor Zong's opinion, the more dangerous a place was, the safer it was. Moreover, only in dangerous places would there be opportunities. He wanted to take revenge on the four evil spirits as soon as possible. Only opportunities could help him grow. Emperor Zong was not in a hurry to leave. This was because he knew that the four evil spirits would definitely arrange for someone to watch over him. Therefore, he had to get rid of these spies. The four evil spirits think highly of me. Emperor Zong scanned the area with his spiritual consciousness and sneered. This was because the seemingly empty imperial city had thousands of people lying in ambush. Four evil spirits, take it as a small gift for you. Emperor Zong suddenly flew into the sky and slammed his palm down. Instantly, thousands of people flew out from the imperial city. These people were at least martial emperors. Some of them were even martial sages. However, it was too late. Emperor Zong's attack had already landed. Instantly, thousands of people were destroyed along with the imperial city. They did not even have the chance to react. Emperor Zong took the opportunity to escape before the four evil spirits could react. At this moment, the four evil spirits had already received the news. Alliance Master, this Emperor Zong is shameless. Should we send someone to kill him in advance? Western Killing Deity asked. No need. The 4 evil spirits are true to their words. There are still a few days left. We can afford to wait. Eastern Killing Deity shook his head. Sect Master, as per your instructions, we have already found out where the direct descendants of the Imperial City and the people of the Imperial City are hiding. Seeing that Eastern Killing Deity was not in a hurry to attack, Western Killing Deity was not in a hurry either. Chapter 442. The 1-month time limit was up. The 4 evil spirits had made their move. Like a whirlwind, they hunted down and killed everyone who had the bloodline of Emperor Zong. In just half a day, 12 million people of Emperor Zong's bloodline had been killed. In other words, Emperor Zong's bloodline had been completely wiped out. At this moment, the people of the 10,000 countries continent finally knew the true strength of the 4 evil spirit. If they did not make a move, they would definitely achieve their goal. Originally, everyone thought that the 4 evil spirits had given Emperor Zong a month time limit because the 4 evil spirits were arrogant enough to give Emperor Zong's bloodline enough time to escape. Now, it seemed that they were not arrogant at all. They were full of confidence. This was not the end. Not only did the 4 evil spirits kill everyone, they even piled up all the corpses in the capital of Zhongxing Nation. There were 10 million corpses piled up like a mountain, attracting the attention of countless people. At this moment, only Emperor Zong was left in the entire Zhongxing Nation. What? You can't find him? You bunch of trash. When the East Sha God heard his subordinates report, he was enraged. The 10,000 countries continent is only so big. Even if you turn it upside down, you have to find him. On the day of the 10,000 countries grand ceremony, I want to see his head. Yes. Hearing the East Sha God's words, the group of martial saints did not dare to disobey. They could only bow and agree. What surprised the people of the 10,000 countries continent was that Emperor Zong seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Even the members of the 4 Fiends Divine Alliance could not find him. However, this made everyone tremble in fear. Because they knew that the 4 evil spirits would not let this matter rest so easily. Therefore, it was possible that any passerby could be one of the 4 evil spirits. If they accidentally offended the 4 evil spirits, they would be finished. At this moment, in the Fire Empire, the Fire Emperor was reporting to Yi Hao about the situation in Zhongxing Nation. The 4 evil spirits. You've gone too far. Yi Hao heard that God Emperor Zong's clan had been annihilated. What kind of concept was this? Anyone who had the slightest bloodline connection with Emperor Zong would be killed. Moreover, this matter was related to him no matter what. Little One being able to become a god had a lot to do with God Emperor Zong. If not for God Emperor Zong's help, Little One would never have been able to successfully become a god. Even the formation of the lightning tribulation would be difficult. At this moment, Emperor God Zong's clan was being annihilated. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Master, be careful. Hearing Yi Hao say that the 4 evil spirits had gone too far, the Fire Emperor's heart skipped a beat. After all, the 4 evil spirits were omnipotent and could be found all over the world. Who knew when they would suddenly appear? Looking at the Fire Emperor's nervous expression, Yi Hao knew that the 4 evil spirits were extremely powerful. Is there any news of Emperor God Zong? Yi Hao was most concerned about Emperor God Zong's death. Not at the moment. The Fire Emperor thought for a moment before saying, if Emperor God Zong is killed, the 4 evil spirits would announce it to the world. I need a martial god. Yi Hao clenched his fist. What he needed the most now was a martial god. The strongest person by his side was Little One. However, in front of the 4 evil spirits, he was nothing. In order to save Emperor God Zong, he needed at least a martial god. If not, everything would be for naught. System, is there any way for me to quickly obtain revival points or soul points? Currently, he only had 50 million soul points. If he wanted to summon a martial god, he would need 100 million soul points. He was still short by half. Mission. Massacre. Gift. Yi Hao looked at the system. He had two missions. One was to unify the entire world. The other was to collect the origin fragments. No matter which one it seemed, it would be extremely difficult. Oh yes, I have a special gift. Yi Hao suddenly thought of something when he saw the system notification. Ding dong, would the host like to open the special gift? Yes. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for obtaining 10 Martial Saint pills. That's it. Yi Hao waited for a long time, but the system did not reply. What I need now is a martial god. A martial god. Yi Hao screamed in his heart. However, he still checked to see what the Martial Saint pill was. Martial Saint pill. It could allow any martial artist to break through to the Martial Saint realm. The side effect was that the martial artist would not be able to cultivate anymore. After reading the description of the pill, Yi Hao could not help but sigh. Powerful. Not just ordinarily powerful. This was because a martial saint was already in existence that could do whatever he wanted in the 10,000 Kingdoms continent. However, it was almost impossible to become a martial saint in an instant with just one pill. Of course, the side effect was also very big. That was that the martial artist would not be able to cultivate anymore. In other words, his cultivation would be stuck at the martial saint realm for the rest of his life. He would not be able to break through to the martial god realm. To some people, this was extremely cruel. However, to some people who were not talented, it was also a great opportunity. Not to mention other things, an ordinary person could only live for 100 years, but a martial saint could live for 50,000 years. Moreover, they would have the power to destroy the world. Suddenly, Yi Hao made a decision. He decided to exchange for the Martial Saint pill formula. That's right, he was going to crazily become a martial saint. System, how many reputation points do I need for the Martial Saint pill formula? Yi Hao asked the system. 10 billion reputation points. How much? Yi Hao rubbed his eyes in shock, afraid that he had seen wrongly. 10 billion. A formula actually needed 10 billion reputation points. System, are you sure you didn't get it wrong? Yi Hao resisted the urge to curse and asked again. 10 billion, why don't you go rob a bank? Yi Hao looked at his reputation points. There was only 1 billion. In his opinion, 1 billion was already a lot. However, compared to 10 billion, 1 billion experience points was really pitiful. However, after thinking for a long time, Yi Hao felt relieved. This was not an ordinary formula. This was a formula that could create an unlimited number of martial saints. After careful calculation, this formula was definitely worth it. However, Yi Hao was immediately vexed. Where was he going to find so many reputation points? Alright, system, do you have the formula for the martial god pill? Yi Hao thought that since the system had the formula for the martial saint pill, then the formula for the martial god pill should not be a problem. Yes. The system's words instantly made Yi Hao excited. At the same time, it immediately poured cold water on him. But you can't afford it. Yi Hao thought about it and agreed. He could not even afford the martial saint pill. However, after being criticized by the system, Yi Hao was a little unhappy. Can't I afford it? Can't I know the price? How much? 1 trillion. Hearing the price announced by the system, Yi Hao almost vomited blood. One should know that only one person could produce 1 reputation point. This 1 trillion represented 1 trillion people. However, Yi Hao was immediately puzzled. Chapter 443. It was as if the system knew what Yi Hao was thinking. The system explained. According to the rules of this world, a martial sage had to undergo a tribulation to break through to the martial god realm. If one consumed the peak martial god pill, one would be able to break through to the peak martial god realm. Hence, the recipe for the peak martial god pill was definitely worth this price. After hearing the system's explanation, Yi Hao agreed. If Xiaoyi was at the peak martial god realm, he would probably be able to break through the tribulation. However, Yi Hao didn't dare to flatter the price. He reckoned that he would only be able to afford the recipe for the peak martial god pill after he unified the 10,000 countries continent. For now, it would be more reliable to exchange for the recipe for the peak martial saint pill. Fire Emperor, how do you think I can increase my reputation? Yi Hao asked the Fire Emperor. Reputation. Hearing Yi Hao's question, the Fire Emperor immediately replied, Of course, it's to let the whole world know about you. Let the whole world know about me. Yi Hao's eyes shone brightly after hearing the Fire Emperor's words. Yi Hao knew that he would have a chance in a month's time. 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony. The purpose of the 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony was to test the countries. The 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony was held once every 3 years. Of course, this was for the lower-ranked countries. For the countries below the imperial level, it would be held once every 30 years. For the martial sage and martial emperor level forces, it would be held once every 300 years. The purpose of the 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony was to split the resources. The strong would go up and the weak would go down. For example, if there were 2 imperial-level forces at the same time, one strong and one weak, the weaker one might drop in rank and become an honored-level force. If the honored-level force became an honored-level force, the resources they could enjoy would be greatly reduced. These resources would then become the spoils of war for the winner. Countless countries were looking forward to the 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony to amaze the world. If they were chosen by a powerful force, they might even be able to soar to the sky. This time, the 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony was the real 10,000 Countries Grand Ceremony. Because it happened to be 300 years ago, all the countries would be holding a competition. For Yi Hao, this was a good opportunity to earn reputation. Logically speaking, Yi Hao's country was currently at the level of a dukedom. It needed to be tested layer by layer to determine the level of the Fire Dragon Empire. But Yi Hao obviously wouldn't go through so much trouble. 1 month later, the 20-odd empires under Yi Hao's command all submitted to the Fire Dragon Empire. As for Yi Hao, he couldn't be bothered to go through the competition level by level. He borrowed the power of the Fire Empire's ranking system and started the competition from the Emperor level. The Emperor level competition was divided into several hundred regions and camps. In each region, there were 10 national forces of the same level that formed the same camp. At that time, the hundreds of regional factions would be randomly divided into groups. The winner would be promoted, and the loser would be demoted. It was already very good to be able to maintain their original level. In this competition, there was no difference between the ruler and the subordinate powers. All the powers were free to do whatever they wanted. Master, this time, we've been divided into 9 empires of the same level. 6 of them aren't worth mentioning. However, the Zhou Empire's emperor is a peak martial saint, the Song Empire's emperor is related to the Emperor dynasty, and the Emperor Wu Empire's emperor is extremely talented. These 3 are troublesome. These empires were currently under the control of the Imperial Pavilion. Hence, the name list in the Fire Emperor's hands was given to him by the Imperial Pavilion. As for the Imperial Pavilion, it was above all the other powers. The Imperial Pavilion didn't belong to any of the powers and was a place where justice was served. As for the fairness of a country's ranking system, it was completely under the control of the Imperial Pavilion. The person I asked you to prepare is an ordinary person. Are you ready? Yi Hao ignored the name list and asked. Although the Fire Emperor didn't understand, he still replied honestly, Master, I've prepared him long ago. Let them in. Yi Hao nodded his head, following which 10 ordinary people walked into the hall, trembling. Their faces were filled with fear and none of them dared to raise their heads. Looking at the 10 fearful people, Yi Hao opened his mouth and said, "Raise your heads." Hearing Yi Hao's words, although the 10 of them were afraid, they still raised their heads obediently. "Do you know why I'm looking for you?" Yi Hao asked softly. Hearing Yi Hao's words, the 10 of them were puzzled as they shook their heads frantically. This was because they were just ordinary people. Not to mention anything else, just standing in this golden hall made their legs tremble uncontrollably. "Do you wish to become strong cultivators?" Yi Hao opened his mouth and asked. The 10 of them nodded their heads before shaking their heads. This was because they didn't know what Yi Hao wanted to do. Hence, they were filled with fear towards the unknown. "I'll give you power. Of course, the condition is that you eat this pill. If you don't, you can take some money and leave." Yi Hao flipped his palms and 10 pills appeared in his palms. Yi Hao then gestured to the Fire Emperor. Immediately, a few guards brought in some gold. The 10 of them looked at the pills in Yi Hao's hands before looking at the gold in the guards' hands. With this gold, even if they didn't become martial artists, it would be enough for them to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. However, it was almost everyone's dream to become a martial artist. At the same time, they didn't understand what Yi Hao was up to. "Your Excellency, I don't want money. I don't know anything. Please let me go." Suddenly, one of them knelt down and begged loudly. Following this person's pleas, a few others followed suit and only wanted to live. Yi Hao didn't speak and continued looking at the crowd. At this point, there were 5 people who were still standing. Yi Hao could see that these 5 people were hesitating. "I choose money. I hope Your Excellency can keep your promise and let me live." Suddenly, one of them chose money. "I choose money too. I choose money too. Me too." Out of the remaining 5 people, 4 of them chose money. Yi Hao was a little disappointed. However, even so, his martial sage pill wasn't that easy to obtain. "I won't make things difficult for you. However, whether or not you have the luck to obtain it depends on you. What about you? Do you choose strength or money?" Yi Hao looked at one of the remaining people and asked softly. "I choose strength." "Oh!" Yi Hao was a little surprised. "Why?" Hearing Yi Hao's question, the last person standing had a look of hatred in his eyes. "Because I want revenge. I need strength. However, my talent is too weak." Speaking of his talent, the eyes of the last person standing were filled with unwillingness. This was because only he knew how weak his talent was. If he relied on himself, he wouldn't have the chance to become a martial artist. Even if he were to become a disciple, no one would want him. One could imagine how weak his talent was. "Alright, if you want to have strength, then eat this pill. I'll be frank. This is a loyalty pill. Once you eat it, you will be loyal to me forever. After all, I can't give you strength for free. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. After all, if you want strength, you have to pay the corresponding price. Choose for yourself." Yi Hao said as he held the mind control pill in his hand. Yi Hao learned from the system that this martial sage pill couldn't be used on the characters summoned by the system. Therefore, Yi Hao could only think of people from the Myriad Kingdom continent. However, if he wanted to obtain the martial sage pill, he had to be someone loyal to him. Otherwise, there might be trouble. Chapter 444. Very good. Yi Hao threw the mind control pill in his hand forward and accurately into He Xing's mouth. He Xing waited for half a day and realized that his powers didn't increase. He then asked anxiously, "What did you feed me? You're lying to me." The other 9 people saw that He Xing's powers didn't increase after eating the pill and their eyes were filled with mockery. Seeing that He Xing was being disrespectful to Yi Hao, the Fire Emperor snorted coldly as he exerted his martial arts powers, forcing He Xing to kneel on the ground. He Xing knelt on the ground with a look of unwillingness on his face. "I've said it before. It's a pill that increases your loyalty. Yi Hao then took out a martial saint pill and tossed it to He Xing. "Eat it." Looking at the pill in He Xing's hand, the Fire Emperor was moved by the fragrance of the pill. This was because the Fire Emperor could sense that the pill in He Xing's hand was no ordinary pill. He Xing looked at the pill in his hand as well. It was emitting a strange fragrance. However, he had already eaten the pill and was unwilling to eat it again. However, he realized that he couldn't reject Yi Hao's words. He couldn't control his hands as he swallowed the pill. Boom! As soon as the pill entered his stomach, He Xing's hair exploded and fluttered in the wind. "Ah! I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so hot. I feel like I'm going to explode." He Xing felt as if his body was going to explode as he scratched his head in agony. At this point, He Xing's clothes had already turned into powder. Luckily, everyone present was male. If not, it would be extremely awkward. He Xing's entire body was flushed red as his veins bulged. "Will he be alright?" Yi Hao looked at He Xing's state and asked the system worriedly. After all, it allowed a person to have the powers of a martial saint. He didn't know if He Xing's body could withstand it. If he couldn't, not only would he have wasted a pill, He Xing might even explode and die. Looking at He Xing's state, the other 9 people were secretly relieved as they retreated to one side in fear. To them, He Xing was asking for trouble and reaping what he had sown. Power wasn't something that could be gained so easily. "Don't worry," the system replied coldly. Fortunately, He Xing's state of pain did not last for long. After a while, as if the effects of the medicine had worn off, He Xing sat down cross-legged. "Thank you, my lord." After a while, He Xing suddenly opened his eyes in joy. Feeling the majestic power in his body, He Xing immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yi Hao to express his gratitude. "Fire Emperor, give it a try." Yi Hao looked at the Fire Emperor and said, "What?" The Fire Emperor was stunned. He was a high-level martial emperor. Killing He Xing didn't even require him to lift a finger. He Xing. Before the Fire Emperor could even reject him, Yi Hao shouted out to He Xing. He Xing immediately understood what Yi Hao meant as he clenched his fists and charged towards the Fire Emperor. One had to know that for someone of the Fire Emperor's level, if he were to stomp his feet, He Xing would have to kneel down immediately, much less raise his fist and charge towards the Fire Emperor. However, the majestic power in his body gave him enough confidence. Humph! Seeing that He Xing was charging towards him, the Fire Emperor snorted coldly. After all, even a clay bodhisattva would have a temper. Furthermore, he was a martial emperor and was being challenged by an ordinary person. If he didn't teach He Xing a lesson, he wouldn't be able to stand it. However, the Fire Emperor was afraid of hurting He Xing and thus only used 1,000th of his strength. One had to know that this 1,000th of his strength was enough to deal with an ordinary person. The 9 ordinary people looked at He Xing with pity in their eyes, as if he didn't know his own limits. An ordinary person dared to challenge a martial emperor. Furthermore, he was an emperor. If that wasn't courting death, then what was? Purring! In the blink of an eye, the 2 of them started fighting. "AI, his speed is very fast." Seeing He Xing's speed, the Fire Emperor's voice was filled with shock. How is that possible?" All of a sudden, something even more shocking happened. The Fire Emperor felt a sharp pain in his right arm. His expression changed as he realized what was happening. One had to know that He Xing was chosen by himself. He was a real trash who didn't even have the chance to become a martial artist. Even if he was placed among ordinary people, he would be beaten up. However, at this moment, he could actually feel pain. How could he not be shocked? Could this be the effect of my master's pill? The Fire Emperor thought. However, he had already retreated 3 steps while He Xing was still standing at his original spot, smiling at him. The Fire Emperor was enraged. He was a martial emperor. Now that he was defeated by an ordinary person, how would he be able to show his face in the future? The other 9 people had looks of shock on their faces as well. This couldn't be an act, right? How could an ordinary person like them force a martial emperor to retreat 3 steps? Even if he went easy on them, it shouldn't be possible. It was as if an ant wanted to push an elephant. It was impossible to even think about it. I've only used 1,000th of my strength. You have to be careful from now on. Although the Fire Emperor's heart was filled with anger, he still reminded him kindly. The Fire Emperor wanted to use all his strength. However, he remembered that He Xing had taken his master's pill. If He Xing lost too badly, his lord wouldn't be able to live up to his name. Thinking up to this point, the Fire Emperor used 30% of his strength. Seeing the hesitation in the Fire Emperor's eyes, Yi Hao knew what the Fire Emperor was thinking. If the Fire Emperor knew that He Xing was a martial saint, would he still go easy on him? Seeing the Fire Emperor charging towards him, He Xing smiled and scratched his head. He then clenched his fists and charged forward as well. Purring! The 2 of them collided once again. When the crowd saw the Fire Emperor's ferocious strength, they knew that the Fire Emperor was enraged. Hence, the crowd didn't think highly of He Xing. They knew that He Xing's strength came from Yi Hao's pill. However, no matter how powerful a pill was, it would be good if it could raise a person's cultivation level by a few levels. They didn't believe that Yi Hao's pill was so powerful. It could allow an ordinary person to break through to the martial emperor realm and even defeat a veteran martial emperor. Even thinking about it made them feel that it was impossible. In this world, how could there be such a perverted pill master who could concoct such a powerful pill? Unless this pill came from the upper realm. However, how could Yi Hao bear to let them eat a pill that came from the upper realm? However, what shocked them was something else. Just as they had expected, He Xing wasn't sent flying by the enraged Fire Emperor. When the 2 of them collided, a huge wave of energy spread out in all directions. The 9 of them immediately hid behind a huge pillar. He Xing stuck his head out from behind the pillar and was still smiling. The Fire Emperor, on the other hand, wasn't pushed back by 3 meters. Instead, he was pushed back by 10 meters. How is this possible? The Fire Emperor shouted out in shock. He had used 30% of his strength. Without mentioning the others, even a powerful cultivator like the Emperor Wu would be defeated by him. Chapter 445. Fire Emperor, you're no match for him. Seeing that the Fire Emperor was about to charge forward, Yi Hao spoke out. Just the fact that He Xing was able to defeat the Fire Emperor twice was enough to prove that the martial saint pill was worthy of its name. What? Impossible! Hearing Yi Hao's words, the Fire Emperor was even more indignant. He didn't believe that Yi Hao's pill was so powerful. It could make an ordinary person stronger than him. How could there be such a powerful pill in this world? At least, he hadn't heard of such a pill before. The Fire Emperor raised his fist and charged towards He Xing. However, this time, he used all his strength. Kid, be careful. The Fire Emperor's fighting spirit was boiling. Your Majesty! The commotion within the hall attracted the attention of the guards outside. A group of guards rushed in and looked at the Fire Emperor. Stand down! The Fire Emperor didn't even look at the guards as he ordered coldly. The guards looked at the Fire Emperor and then at Yi Hao before looking at He Xing. They then hurriedly left the hall. Be gentle! Yi Hao was afraid that He Xing wouldn't be able to control his strength well and would injure the Fire Emperor. Don't worry, Master. I will. The Fire Emperor rushed towards He Xing. I admit defeat now. It's not too late. He Xing nodded his head at Yi Hao before charging towards the Fire Emperor as well. All of a sudden, He Xing released his aura. The Fire Emperor felt that He Xing, who was just like an ordinary person, was now exuding a powerful aura. This was the cultivation level of a martial saint. Feeling He Xing's aura surging towards him, the Fire Emperor's heart skipped a beat as he retreated. Are you trying to kill me? Hurry up and retract your aura. The Fire Emperor shouted out anxiously as he retreated frantically. Ah! He Xing had a look of confusion on his face. This was his first time controlling his own aura and hence he wasn't very familiar with it. I can't control it. He Xing shouted out bitterly. Zhang Fei. Yi Hao immediately summoned Zhang Fei out. Zhang Fei saw that the situation was dire and immediately grabbed onto He Xing, causing his aura to dissipate. Phew! The Fire Emperor saw that he was safe and heaved a sigh of relief. The Fire Emperor turned around and saw that the area behind him was a mess. If not for Zhang Fei's help, even if he didn't die, he would still be half dead. I'm sorry. I really didn't do it on purpose. He Xing had a nervous look on his face as he spoke to the Fire Emperor. The Fire Emperor had a bellyful of anger as well, but when he saw He Xing's expression, he couldn't do anything about it. However, as soon as he thought of He Xing's explosive strength, the Fire Emperor swallowed his saliva and asked, "How did you do that? Are you sure you didn't have any cultivation before this?" The Fire Emperor's eyes sparkled as he looked at He Xing nervously. When He Xing heard the Fire Emperor's words, he immediately shook his head. "Didn't you test me before? With my innate talent, how could I possibly become a martial artist?" The Fire Emperor thought about it and agreed. "Do you feel any discomfort now?" He Xing sensed his body and shook his head again. "Other than feeling like I'm using up an inexhaustible amount of energy, I don't feel any discomfort." When the Fire Emperor heard this, he looked at Yi Hao with a burning gaze. "Master, how did you do it?" "This is a martial saint pill. Once you eat it, you will attain the cultivation level of a martial saint." Yi Hao took out a pill and explained. As the Fire Emperor was extremely loyal to him, Yi Hao didn't hide anything from him. Cultivation level of a martial saint. The Fire Emperor stared at the pill in Yi Hao's hand and swallowed his saliva as he resisted the urge to snatch it away. If it weren't for He Xing, he wouldn't have believed it even if he was beaten to death. "Master, where did you get this from?" the Fire Emperor asked subconsciously before realizing that he'd said something wrong. He then looked at Yi Hao. "Master, can you give me a pill?" The Fire Emperor's respect for Yi Hao was unknowingly greater than before. At this point, the 9 ordinary people looked at He Xing enviously. At the same time, they looked greedily at the pill in Yi Hao's hand. That pill could allow a person to attain the cultivation level of a martial saint. Once a person attained that cultivation level, although he wouldn't be able to live forever, he would be able to live for 50,000 years. Furthermore, once a person attained the cultivation level of a martial saint, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the entire world. He would definitely be able to live a life of luxury and wealth. With such a cultivation level, he would be respected and worshipped by millions of people. The more they thought about it, the more their hearts burned with passion. "Master, we are willing to pledge our allegiance to you. We don't want money or treasures. We want cultivation levels." All of a sudden, one of the ordinary people knelt down in front of the main hall. "Master, I don't want anything as well. Whatever pill you give me, I'll eat it. I'll be absolutely loyal to you. And Master, please give me a pill." After seeing He Xing's cultivation level, and hearing Yi Hao's words, the 9 of them rushed forward. If it weren't for the fact that they were in front of Yi Hao, they might have started fighting. This was a heavenly opportunity and they had to grab hold of it. As long as Yi Hao gave them a pill, they would be able to reach the heavens in a single bound. In the past, they would never have dreamed of such an opportunity. But now, it was right in front of them. At this moment, they were extremely regretful. Why didn't they agree to Yi Hao like He Xing? If they hadn't hesitated and followed He Xing's example, they would have been peak martial sages by now. Seeing the 9 of them fighting to be the first to argue, Yi Hao stretched out his hand and gestured for them to be quiet. "I'm sorry. I gave you a chance but you didn't take it. This is how the martial arts world is. Opportunities are fleeting, and you don't have a chance anymore. Master, I beg you. You can't be so biased. Master, I'm willing to do anything for you. Just give me a pill. Master, I know I'm wrong. I also want to become a powerful cultivator. The 9 of them were so agitated that they kowtowed to the ground. Master, if you don't give us a pill, we'll keep kowtowing. Suddenly, one of them spoke up. Yi Hao instantly raised his eyebrows. Why are you threatening me? Yi Hao didn't expect these people to be so blinded by the peak martial sage pill that they actually dared to threaten him. Master, how would we dare to threaten you? It doesn't matter who you give the pill to. Give us a few and we'll definitely be loyal to you. One of them raised his head and said, I won't give it to you. Yi Hao was a little enraged at this point. If it weren't for the fact that these people were his subjects, he would have taught them a lesson long ago. At this point, the Fire Emperor's face was ashen. One had to know that these commoners were his subject. How dare they threaten Yi Hao so recklessly? If you don't give it to us, I believe that more people will be interested in your pill. At this point, the 9 of them had lost their minds over the peak martial sage pill and their cultivation. Chapter 446. There's only one pill. Whoever wants it can have it. Yi Hao suddenly took out a pill and said. The 9 of them stared greedily at the pill in Yi Hao's hands. If not for the fact that they were afraid of Yi Hao's strength, the 9 of them would have rushed forward. The Fire Emperor was anxious. After all, this pill was too precious. How could he give it to these people? However, he didn't dare to say anything about Yi Hao's decision. This pill is for you. Whoever gets it will have to depend on your abilities. Yi Hao threw the pill in front of the 9 of them. Your Excellency, there are 9 of us. Isn't one pill too little? One of them said unhappily. Yi Hao closed his eyes and didn't say a word. The 9 of them looked at each other. Ah, what are you trying to do? Suddenly, one of them reached out to grab the pill. However, another one grabbed him by the shoulder. In the blink of an eye, the 9 of them started to wrestle with each other, throwing punches and kicks at each other. Although the 9 of them were barehanded, for the sake of the pill, they were willing to do anything. Some of them even used their own teeth. Ha ha ha, the pill is mine. I'm about to become a martial saint. Finally, 8 of them were beaten so badly that they couldn't get up. The remaining one, who was covered in blood, picked up the pill and laughed proudly. The 8 of them who were lying on the ground struggled with all their might. Their faces were filled with unwillingness as they stared at the pill. You bunch of trash. You still want to fight with me? The man who snatched the pill looked at the 8 of them with disdain and swallowed the pill. However, after waiting for a long time, he clutched his stomach and said, You're so despicable. You didn't give me a pill to raise my cultivation. Yi Hao looked at him coldly. A bunch of ants. How dare you threaten me? You've been blinded by greed. Since you've threatened me, you have to pay the price. The man who had swallowed the pill heard Yi Hao's words and died with a look of unwillingness on his face. Your Excellency, please spare our lives. Your Excellency, we don't want the pill anymore. Seeing those who had eaten the pill being poisoned to death, the expressions of the remaining 8 changed. They knew that there were some people whom they could not threaten, so they immediately begged for mercy. What a pity! It's over. Yi Hao looked at He Xing. He Xing immediately understood what Yi Hao meant and rushed towards the 8 people. In the blink of an eye, all 8 of them were dead. My lord, can you give me a pill? The Fire Emperor didn't bother about those who had died because they had dared to threaten Yi Hao. They deserved to die. You have to know that after consuming this pill, your cultivation level will be stabilized at the peak of the martial saint stage. You won't be able to cultivate in the future. You have to think this through. Seeing the look of desire on the Fire Emperor's face, Yi Hao reminded him. The Fire Emperor fell silent. After some time, the Fire Emperor spoke out, Master, I've made my decision. Please bestow me a pill. This wasn't just because of the Fire Emperor's desire to reach the peak of the Martial Saint realm. It was also because he knew of his own talent. If he were to spend his entire life cultivating, it would be good if he could reach the Martial Saint stage. If he were to consume a pill, he would be able to reach the peak of the Martial Saint stage. That would be far beyond his goal. Furthermore, he believed that this pill would be extremely valuable. He was afraid that if he were to miss this opportunity, Yi Hao would be gone. "Have you made your decision?" Yi Hao couldn't help but ask again. After all, after consuming the pill, his cultivation level would increase by leaps and bounds. However, he wouldn't be able to break through in the future. In other words, he would reach the end of the path of cultivation. To some people, this was extremely frightening. Furthermore, after consuming a Martial Saint stage pill, there would be no room for regrets. The Fire Emperor nodded his head solemnly. Seeing that the Fire Emperor had made up his mind, Yi Hao didn't try to persuade him any further. Anyway, it didn't matter who the Martial Saint stage pill was given to. Giving one to the Fire Emperor wouldn't be a big loss for him. Yi Hao retrieved a Martial Saint stage pill and threw it to the Fire Emperor. The Fire Emperor looked at the Martial Saint pill in his hands and swallowed it without hesitation. This was because there were still things that he had to deal with personally. The Fire Emperor was a martial emperor. After consuming the Martial Saint stage pill, his condition wasn't as bad as He Xing's. The Fire Emperor closed his eyes and absorbed the energy of the pill. The Fire Emperor could feel his cultivation level rising like a rocket. All the obstacles that had been difficult for him to break through in the past were now completely useless in front of the pill. His cultivation level rose by leaps and bounds. He was able to break through all obstacles in his way. The thrill of leveling up was something that he had never experienced before. Phew! His cultivation level rose to the peak of the Martial Saint stage. The Fire Emperor opened his eyes reluctantly. "This feels so good." "Your subordinate thanks you, Master. I shall do my best to serve you." The Fire Emperor knew that his cultivation level was all thanks to Yi Hao. "He Xing, let's spar again." The Fire Emperor had suffered a loss at the hands of He Xing and was still thinking about it. At this point, the Fire Emperor could feel the power within his body. He rubbed his palms together and looked at He Xing. He Xing looked at Yi Hao. Yi Hao nodded his head. He wanted to see if there was any difference between the Fire Emperor and He Xing because they were both peak martial saints. After receiving Yi Hao's permission, the both of them began to spar. At the start, they were evenly matched in terms of strength. However, when it came to battle experience, He Xing was at a disadvantage. Furthermore, the Fire Emperor hadn't even used any martial arts techniques. If the Fire Emperor used any martial arts techniques, He Xing would be defeated instantly. Seeing the difference between the both of them, Yi Hao dismissed the idea of finding a few ordinary people to spar with. This was because although ordinary people and martial artists could both reach the peak of the Martial Saint stage, there was still a difference between them. "Fire Emperor, help me find a few martial artists who haven't been able to break through their cultivation level." Yi Hao spoke to the Fire Emperor. Boom! Just as Yi Hao's words landed, the doors of the main hall were slammed open from the outside. Yi Hao's interest was piqued. This was the Nine Dragons Grand Hall of the Fire Empire. It represented the highest authority in the Fire Empire. Anyone who dared to barge in would be slapping the Fire Emperor's face. Either the intruders didn't know what was good for them, or they came with ill intentions. When the Fire Emperor saw the doors being slammed open, his face fell as he shouted out, "How dare you? Who dares to barge into the Nine Dragons Grand Hall? Are you tired of living?" "Your Majesty, it's the Supreme Prince and the others," the guard hurriedly replied. Scram! All of a sudden, the guard was pushed aside as an arrogant voice could be heard. "My imperial uncles, what's the meaning of this?" Seeing the four of them enter the main hall, the Fire Emperor's face fell as he asked. Of course we're here to see what our good nephew has done in the Nine Dragons Grand Hall. Huomie spoke arrogantly. Seventh Imperial Uncle, there are some things that you shouldn't say. The Fire Emperor controlled his anger as he spoke. In his heart, he knew that these Imperial Uncles were coveting his position as the Emperor. That was why they were causing trouble for him. However, these Imperial Uncles didn't get along well with each other. Hence, they didn't dare to go overboard. It wasn't until he returned that he received the news. These Imperial Uncles actually took advantage of his absence and joined forces with the people from the Sun Imperial City to deal with him. Looking at the way these people acted, it was obvious that they were confident in defeating him. Chapter 447. The Fire Emperor's face turned ashen. These uncles could insult anyone but Yi Hao. Yi Hao sat on the throne and watched quietly. He believed that the Fire Emperor wouldn't disappoint him. Uncles, please be more respectful. The Fire Emperor spoke in a low voice. Yes, Your Majesty. The uncles' attitudes changed. Just as the Fire Emperor was puzzled, Huomie spoke. I have a request, but I'm not sure if I should say it. The Fire Emperor squinted his eyes and looked at the uncles. Please speak. We feel that Your Majesty is not suitable to be the Emperor of the Fire Empire. We would like to ask Your Majesty to step down. Huomie laughed as he spoke. The Fire Emperor was enraged as he shouted, What did you say? If Your Majesty doesn't agree, we have no choice but to purge the Fire Emperor's subordinates. Huomie threatened. The Fire Emperor hadn't expected his imperial uncles to be so generous. He really couldn't understand what the great Sun Empire had given these old fogies. What benefits did they get? Purging the Fire Emperor's subordinates, to put it bluntly, was to get rid of the traitorous officials around the Emperor. Strictly speaking, it was to make him a mere figurehead. What if I don't agree? The Fire Emperor was on the verge of exploding. Then don't blame us. We will take your father's place and teach you a lesson. Huoji harumphed coldly as he revealed his 8th Order Martial Emperor cultivation. You actually broke through. The Fire Emperor squinted his eyes as he looked at Huoji. One had to know that Huoji's cultivation had been stuck at the 7th Order Martial Emperor for many years. There's still us. Your Majesty, please be tactful. At the same time, the remaining 3 uncles revealed their cultivation levels as well. The Fire Emperor took a closer look and realized that all of their cultivations had broken through to the next level. It seemed like these people only dared to act against him because he had broken through to the Fire Emperor's cultivation level. If he was still at his previous cultivation level, he might really be finished and would have to hand over the throne to him. But now, he was at the peak of the martial saint realm. These uncles were like ants in his eyes. It seems like these uncles are determined to defeat me. The Fire Emperor laughed coldly. Your Majesty, what are you saying? It's just that you've been on the throne for long enough. It's time for you to step aside. Furthermore, His Majesty is a little muddle-headed right now. The throne of the Fire Empire is actually being given to such a shady person. As they spoke, the imperial uncles looked disdainfully at Yi Hao, who was sitting on the throne. Son of AB*TCH, are you blind? Hurry up and get down here. Huoji wanted to intimidate the Fire Emperor as he roared and charged towards Yi Hao. Scram! Yi Hao slapped Huoji across the face when he saw him charging towards him. Damn it! You're discussing your own family matters, and in order to act tough, you want to make a move on me? Do you think I'll spoil you? Huoji was sent flying by Yi Hao's slap and smashed into a large pillar. Huoji's head was spinning from the beating, and he fell limp to the ground. At this moment, the imperial uncles were shocked. They all looked at Yi Hao warily. You guys continue, don't disturb me. Yi Hao waved his hands. Phew! When the imperial uncles heard Yi Hao's words, they all heaved a sigh of relief. Who is this young man? He could actually send our third brother flying with a slap. What cultivation level is he at? Looks like he came with ill intentions. Otherwise, the Fire Emperor wouldn't have allowed him to sit on the throne. Let's be careful and not offend him. The few of them went for wool and came home shorn. Initially, they wanted to use Yi Hao to intimidate the Fire Emperor. Who would have thought that they would be scared stiff in the end? That, Your Majesty, we still have matters to attend to. Let's discuss this another time. Seeing that Yi Hao was here, the few of them didn't dare to threaten the Fire Emperor. After all, they didn't know what relationship Yi Hao had with the Fire Emperor. Hence, the few of them looked at each other and spoke to the Fire Emperor. You guys come and go as you please. Do you still have me in your eyes? The Fire Emperor harumphed coldly as the aura of a martial saint surged out from his body and pressed down on the Imperial uncles. The few Imperial uncles couldn't take it anymore and fell to their knees. Feeling the Fire Emperor's cultivation level, the few Imperial uncles looked as if they had eaten **T. Your Majesty, your cultivation level. Huomie seemed to have forgotten how arrogant he was at the start and pointed at the Fire Emperor in shock. They were very clear about the Fire Emperor's cultivation level. The Fire Emperor's cultivation level was the same as theirs, at the 8th Order Martial Emperor. If not, the four of them wouldn't have dared to force the Fire Emperor to abdicate. This was because they felt that they could defeat the Fire Emperor. However, the power that the Fire Emperor had displayed caused them to feel like they were about to die. Most of them couldn't believe it. They couldn't understand. The Fire Emperor had just gone out for a round. Cultivation level. How did his cultivation level increase so much? Even if the Fire Emperor's cultivation level rose to the First Order Martial Saint, they wouldn't be able to accept it. Furthermore, the Fire Emperor had broken through from the 8th Order Martial Emperor to the peak of the Martial Saint realm. How did you do it? Huomie asked anxiously. If the Fire Emperor told them about this method, it would be impossible for their Fire Empire to not rise. The few of you should think about what crime it is to usurp the throne, the Fire Emperor said coldly. Hearing the Fire Emperor's words, the Imperial uncles' faces fell. If the Fire Emperor was at the peak of the Martial Emperor realm, they might have been able to muster up the courage to deal with him. However, the Fire Emperor was at the peak of the Martial Saint realm. They couldn't muster up the courage to do so. Furthermore, the Fire Emperor's aura was so oppressive that they couldn't even breathe, much less resist. Your Majesty, I believe that you wouldn't be so cruel to us. We are your Imperial uncles. Your Majesty, you can't disregard family ties just because you have a cultivation level. If the late Emperor was still alive, he would never have wanted to see you kill us. The Imperial uncles hurriedly spoke out. Hearing their words, the Fire Emperor was even angrier. Then why didn't you think about the fact that you are my Imperial uncles when you were forcing me to do so? Why didn't you think about family ties when you wanted to get rid of me? Since you have my Imperial father in your eyes, why would you want to kill me? Which one of you can tell me? The Fire Emperor's shouts caused the four Imperial uncles to be rendered speechless. Your Majesty, this old subject knows his mistake and will follow your lead. Under the Fire Emperor's pressure, the Imperial uncles had no choice but to submit to him. Furthermore, the Fire Emperor's cultivation level had reached the peak of the Martial Saint realm. This had never happened before in the history of the Hua family. Hence, if nothing unexpected happened, the Fire Emperor would lead the Hua family to glory. Hence, as long as they weren't stupid, they had to follow the Fire Emperor closely. Chapter 448. Your Majesty, please take into account that we have worked hard for the Fire Empire. Even if we haven't done anything for the Fire Empire, please spare us. Your Majesty, you can't be so cruel. You have to know that the Great Sun Empire isn't easy to deal with. The Great Sun Empire has received help from a mysterious force. There are quite a number of martial saints holding the fort. The royal uncles begged bitterly. When Yi Hao heard the name of the Great Sun Empire, His expression changed. "Tell me, what's the name of the mysterious force behind the great Sun Empire?" When they heard Yi Hao's anxious tone, the few imperial uncles looked at each other in dismay. "Speak!" the Fire Emperor shouted. The few imperial uncles felt bitter and shook their heads. "We don't know. But we're sure that the great Sun Empire has a martial saint. If not, we wouldn't." The voices of the imperial uncles became softer and softer as they looked at the Fire Emperor carefully. Cowards!" The Fire Emperor snorted coldly. He finally understood why the imperial uncles were colluding with the great Sun Empire. They were frightened by the martial saints of the great Sun Empire. "We don't have a choice. The Fire Emperor's bloodline and foundation cannot be destroyed for no reason. Besides, with the strength of the Fire Emperor, going against the great Sun Empire is like throwing an egg against a rock." Hormia spoke with a desolate look on his face. "I'll give you a chance. Pledge your loyalty to me. Are you willing to do so?" Yi Hao suddenly had an idea and asked. The few imperial uncles looked at each other and hurriedly said, we're willing. Take this pill first." Yi Hao took out 4 mind control pills. Seeing the pills in Yi Hao's hand, the few of them didn't know what they were and hence hesitated. They didn't dare to take the pills. The Fire Emperor was anxious. Although these few imperial uncles wanted to usurp the throne, it was to protect themselves. However, at the end of the day, these few imperial uncles were still from the Fire Emperor's Hua family. Seeing Yi Hao take out the mind control pills, he naturally understood what Yi Hao meant. This was a sign that he wanted to subdue these imperial uncles for his own use. If Yi Hao could give each of them a peak martial saint pill, that would be a great opportunity for the Hua clan. The Fire Emperor noticed their hesitation and hurriedly urged them, "Hurry up and take it." Seeing the anxious look on the Fire Emperor's face, the imperial uncles understood the Fire Emperor's character. If this were an ordinary pill, the Fire Emperor wouldn't have lost his composure. Moreover, if Yi Hao wanted to harm them, he didn't have to go through so much trouble. With Yi Hao's ability to send Hua Ji flying with a single slap, it probably wouldn't take much effort for him to kill them. The few of them did not hesitate and immediately took the mind control pill. "This is for you." Seeing that the few of them had consumed the mind-controlling pills, a system notification sounded at the same time. Only then did Yi Hao take out 4 peak martial sage pills. As soon as the 4 peak martial sacred realm pills were taken out, the entire hall was filled with a strong medicinal fragrance. Everyone felt refreshed after taking a whiff of it. Seeing these 4 pills, the 4 imperial uncles thought of a terrifying possibility. The 4 imperial uncles looked at the Fire Emperor in disbelief. The Fire Emperor nodded his head with a flushed face. He didn't expect that he had guessed correctly. Yi Hao had really given the 4 imperial uncles a peak martial sage pill each. This meant that the Hua clan had gained another 4 martial sages. Seeing the Fire Emperor nod his head, the 4 imperial uncles received the peak martial sage pills with trembling hands. The 4 of them looked at the pills in their hands and swallowed them immediately, as if they were afraid that someone would snatch them away from them. Soon, their cultivation levels broke through to the peak of martial sage realm. The 4 of them were in disbelief at first, then shock and finally joy. All sorts of emotions flashed across their faces. According to their talents and their remaining lifespan, breaking through to the peak of martial emperor realm was already their limit. However, they had never thought that they would be able to break through to the martial sage realm. Otherwise, they wouldn't have joined the Great Sun Empire just to break through to the 8th Order martial emperor realm. This cultivation level came too suddenly, and they felt as if they were in a dream. "Thank you, Master." The 4 of them knelt down and thanked him. "Get up. I have something for you to do." "Reporting to your Majesty, the 4 old fellows from the Fire Empire are here." At this moment, in the Great Sun Empire, Emperor Sun was discussing the grand ceremony that was going to take place a month later. At this moment, a personal guard came to report to him. Did they come by themselves? Emperor's son raised his eyebrows and asked with a trace of interest. No, there are 3 outsiders. One of them seems to be the Fire Emperor. The personal guard guest. What? Emperor's son's face lit up. These old fellows didn't waste the 4 godly pills I gave them. They really managed to capture the Fire Emperor. At this moment, Emperor's son still thought that it was his 4 pills that allowed the 4 imperial uncles to capture the Fire Emperor so easily. One must know that before the mysterious force helped him, he had always regarded the Fire Emperor as his greatest enemy and competitor. After all, the 2 empires were too close to each other and their strength was similar. He didn't expect that the Fire Emperor would become his captive so quickly. Emperor's son put down the things in his hands and was in a good mood. Quick, bring him here. Ha ha ha, Fire Emperor, I didn't expect you to be captured by your own imperial uncles. The feeling must be terrible. Seeing that the Fire Emperor had been captured by the 2 imperial uncles, Emperor's son laughed out proudly. Looks like Emperor's son is in a good mood. The Fire Emperor broke free from the hands of the 2 imperial uncles and laughed. When Emperor's son saw this, his face fell. You 4 old fellows, are you tired of living? How dare you play tricks on me? Seeing that the 4 imperial uncles were standing respectfully and ignoring him, Emperor's son couldn't help but be enraged. Following which, Emperor's son turned his gaze towards Yi Hao. This was because at this moment, Yi Hao was standing in front of the 6 imperial uncles, while the Fire Emperor and the others were standing respectfully behind Yi Hao. It was impossible for them not to attract Emperor's son's attention. Men. Emperor's son didn't have much time to think as he shouted loudly. Just as Emperor's son's voice rang out, several powerful auras started to gather around the main hall. However, what Emperor's son wanted to see was Yi Hao and the others kneeling on the ground. Instead, Yi Hao and the others looked as if nothing had happened and their faces were relaxed. One had to know that the 4 imperial uncles were unable to resist the pressure and were sprawled on the ground. However, at this moment, the 4 imperial uncles were still standing on the ground with relaxed expressions on their faces. Impudent! Yi Hao shouted out loudly. The 4 imperial uncles behind him immediately leapt up from the ground and broke through the roof of the main hall. Pung! 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 Following which, several figures landed in front of Emperor Sunday. Looking at these figures, Emperor's son couldn't be more familiar with them. These were all his trump cards. Each and every one of them was a martial sage. At this point, the 4 imperial uncles landed on the ground and clapped their hands together, looking relaxed. Chapter 449. Emperor's son's greatest reliance was these few martial sages. But now they were all seriously injured and lying on the ground. This filled Emperor's son's heart with fear. Who are you? Emperor's son looked at Yi Hao cautiously and asked with a trembling voice. Do you know this person? Yi Hao took out a portrait from his chest. It was a portrait of Yi Batian. This portrait was drawn by an artist based on his memory. Emperor's son couldn't help but look at the portrait carefully. But then, he shook his head. Sir, you must be mistaken. I really don't know this person. Then, Yi country, Yi Batian. Are you familiar with this name? Yi Hao stared at Emperor's son and asked. Hearing the name Yi Batian, Emperor's son's expression suddenly changed. He couldn't help but avert his gaze. But he immediately denied it. I really haven't heard of this name. Do you want to die or confess honestly? Yi Hao grabbed Emperor's son's neck and said. Emperor's son immediately struggled. But he had just broken through to the 2nd-level martial sage. How could he struggle against Yi Hao? Emperor's son was also shocked. How old is Yi Hao? How is his realm higher than mine? Also, who is Yi Hao? Why did he come to Yi Batian? After all, Yi Batian had been captured by the goddess, and the Great Sun Dynasty was able to achieve what it had today because of the goddess's help. If he revealed the news of the goddess and something happened, then the one who would be in trouble would be him. You really won't say it? Yi Hao was furious. He didn't expect Emperor Sun to be so stubborn. But Emperor Sun was the only clue to save Yi Batian. He could only threaten Emperor Sun, but he couldn't really kill Emperor Sun. Emperor Sun made up his mind. Even if he died, he couldn't say anything. Good, very good. Yi Hao was so angry that he laughed. Open his mouth. Oh, what are you trying to do? Emperor Sun struggled with all his might. However, no matter how hard he struggled, he was no match for the two peak martial sage royal uncles. They easily pulled his mouth open. Woo woo woo. Emperor Sun was still struggling with all his might. He hoped that someone would come and save him at this moment. Stop. Suddenly, a woman's shout came from outside the door. Yi Hao couldn't help but look up. Yi Hao was instantly stunned. Emor? When Zi Xing'er heard Yi Hao's voice, she could not help but frown. Her heart was filled with confusion. Who was this person? How did he know Zmo'er's name? Emor, is that you? Yi Hao rubbed his eyes. His eyes were filled with tears, and he tried his best to speak gently. Could it be that he knows the goddess? Emperor Sun asked curiously when he saw Yi Hao's state. At the same time, everyone turned to look at Yi Hao. That was because they didn't understand who it was that could make Yi Hao reveal such an expression. Who are you? Zi Xing'er's eyes flashed with disgust as she asked coldly. Hearing Zi Xing'er's cold words, Yi Hao couldn't help but feel his heart ache. Emor, don't you recognize me? Seeing Yi Hao's expression, Zi Xing'er's eyes flashed with a trace of craftiness. Recently, with the help of Royal Aunt, Zmo'er had been desperately cultivating. Her cultivation was about to surpass hers. Moreover, Zi Xing'er could already feel that Zmo'er had affected her status. If she could find something on Zmo'er from Yi Hao, it would undoubtedly be very beneficial to her. When Zi Xing'er thought of this, her attitude immediately changed and she said gently, "Hee, I'm just teasing you. How could Emor not recognize you?" Yi Hao saw Zi Xing'er's abnormal behavior and felt that something was wrong. Yi Hao took out a lollipop and handed it to Zi Xing'er. What's this? Zi Xing'er looked at the lollipop that Yi Hao handed over and asked with a puzzled expression. As expected, Yi Hao immediately had a conclusion in his heart. One had to know that this lollipop was Emor's favorite food. If the person in front of him was Zmo'er, how could she not recognize the lollipop? Yi Hao suddenly remembered that Zmo'er had once accidentally let slip that she had an older sister. However, she had immediately covered it up. At that time, he didn't think much of it. Therefore, Yi Hao guessed that if nothing unexpected happened, this person should be Zmo'er's sister. However, what shocked Yi Hao was that these two people looked too similar. If he hadn't noticed it, he wouldn't have been able to tell at all. However, what Yi Hao found strange was that Zi Xing'er wasn't Zmo'er. Why did she suddenly pretend to be Zmo'er? Yi Hao believed that there must be something that he didn't understand. Emor, why are you here? Since that was the case, Yi Hao decided to beat her at her own game and asked directly. I'm the princess of the Great Sun Dynasty. This is my father. What are you going to do? My father has been arrested. Zi Xing'er hesitated for a moment and suddenly looked at Emperor Sun and said, But isn't your surname Zi? Yi Hao didn't expect Zi Xing'er to lie so easily. It had only been a short while, and she had already turned herself into the princess of the Great Sun Dynasty. Yi Hao had seen the respect that Emperor Sun had for Zi Xing'er in his eyes. Yi Hao had seen it all. However, since Zi Xing'er was willing to pretend, Yi Hao was naturally happy to accompany her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lie to you back then. Zi Xing'er lowered her head and said with a pitiful expression. Speaking of which, if an ordinary person saw Zi Xing'er's pitiful appearance, their hearts would probably melt. However, Yi Hao knew that Zi Xing'er's attitude was completely different from how it was at the beginning. If there was no problem, then it would really be strange. Moreover, Yi Hao felt uneasy at this moment. It was as if there was a powerful aura around him that was spying on him. When he thought of Zmo saying that he shouldn't look for her unless he was at the martial god level. Could it be that Xing had a martial god level expert protecting her? Yi Hao guessed. Why aren't you letting go of my father? Xing immediately said to the two imperial uncles. The two imperial uncles immediately looked at Yi Hao. Yi Hao nodded. He wanted to see what tricks Xing could play. Moreover, Xing's appearance was equivalent to a clue appearing. It didn't matter whether Emperor Sun wanted it or not. However, the powerful aura around them gave Yi Hao endless pressure. If it was a first-order martial god, then it would be fine. However, if it was a second-order martial god or above, then it would be troublesome. However, looking at Xing's appearance, if he didn't make a move, the hidden expert around Xing probably wouldn't make a move either. Let's go, Mo. Brother Xia Hao will take you to play. Yi Hao held Xing's hand very naturally. Xing wanted to struggle free, but when she thought of how she had to deal with Zmo she had to endure it. At least in her opinion, it would be easy to deal with Yi Hao. Chapter 450. Brother Xia Hao, I've almost forgotten how long it's been since we last met. Xing glanced at Yi Hao and said softly. It should be more than a year. Yi Hao said casually. Xing's heart lit up. She had guessed correctly. This girl had met Yi Hao a year ago. However, she was also curious as to who Yi Hao was and how he and Zmo knew each other. However, looking at Yi Hao's cultivation, which was only at the 4th level martial emperor, she couldn't help but feel disdain. One must know that her current strength had already reached the 3rd level martial saint. Although she couldn't see through the cultivation of the people around Yi Hao, they were at most martial saints. In Xing's opinion, Yi Hao's talent was definitely inferior to hers. However, thinking of Yi Hao's expression when he saw her previously, it meant that the relationship between Yi Hao and Zmo was not ordinary. The two flew all the way to the depths of the magic beast forest. At this time, only the roars of beasts could be heard. Tell me, what is your name and what is your relationship with Zmo? Seeing that there was no one around, Xing stopped hiding. She directly exposed her 3rd level martial saint cultivation and pointed a long sword glowing with purple light at Yi Hao's throat. Mo, what's wrong with you? Yi Hao deliberately pretended not to know what was going on. To tell you the truth, I'm not Zmo. I'm her elder sister, Xing. Xing said coldly. Her eyes were full of disdain as she looked at Yi Hao. It was as if Yi Hao was just trash in her eyes, not worth mentioning at all. What? Yi Hao immediately pretended to be shocked. You're Xing? Xing frowned and looked at Yi Hao in confusion. She continued to ask coldly, You know me? Xing looked at Yi Hao carefully but realized that she had no impression of Yi Hao at all. I don't know you. Yi Hao suddenly changed the topic and shook his head. You're courting death. Seeing that she was being teased by Yi Hao, Xing was furious. The purple star divine sword in her hand stabbed towards Yi Hao. Stinking woman, you really did it! Yi Hao immediately cursed, and at the same time, fled in panic. Princess, do you need me to kill ye? Suddenly, a voice sounded in Xing's mind. No need, I can do it. Xing refused coldly. If she couldn't defeat a mere 4th-order martial emperor like Yi Hao, then she would have lived in vain. Although he was Yi Hao, Yi was Yi Hao's eyes, Yi Hao's now. Yi Hao seized the opportunity and grabbed at Xing. Xing saw that Yi Hao, who had suddenly stopped running, was actually attacking her. At first, she was stunned, then she became angry. Trash, how dare you be so rash? Xing's sword palm blasted towards Yi Hao's head. If Yi Hao was really only a fourth-level martial emperor, he would definitely die after taking this blow. Yi Hao's face was ashen. He didn't expect Xing to be so ruthless. Let's see who's the trash. Yi Hao snorted coldly. The power of a fourth-level martial saint was completely exposed. How is this possible? Xing's expression changed. She didn't understand. Yi Hao was clearly a fourth-level martial emperor. How could he erupt with power that was stronger than hers? Xing panicked and wanted to turn and run. It's too late to run now. Yi Hao snorted and grabbed at Xing. Little bastard, how dare you! Suddenly, a powerful force came from the sky and pounced towards Yi Hao. Yi Hao's heart sank, but he resisted the pressure and grabbed Xing's neck. In this moment of life and death, he didn't care about being gentle. Bastard, let go of me! Xing struggled. Her tone was full of disdain and conceit. Behave yourself, or don't blame me for being ruthless. Yi Hao didn't hold back and slapped Xing's butt. Bastard, how dare you! Xing's face was red, and her heart was filled with anger. She wanted nothing more than to kill Yi Hao immediately. Slap! Yi Hao didn't hold back and slapped her again. You! Xing wanted to speak, but she was afraid that Yi Hao would hit her butt. She was so angry that her chest rose and fell violently. If you don't want to die too miserably, let go of the princess. Suddenly, the air in front of Yi Hao shook, and an old woman appeared in front of Yi Hao. The threat was self-evident. Yi Hao didn't expect that Xing was really a princess. Yi Hao looked at the old woman coldly. If you don't want her to die, get lost. Yi Hao said fearlessly. Because he had Xing as a bargaining chip, he guessed that the old woman wouldn't dare to make a move. You're courting death. The old woman was furious. She had never been threatened by anyone before. Moreover, it was such an inconspicuous boy. As she spoke, the old woman was about to make a move. Come, let's see if you're faster or I'm faster. Yi Hao grabbed Xing's hand and couldn't help but start to exert force. The old woman's expression changed, and the murderous intent in her eyes was unmistakable. But if something happened to the princess, the responsibility was definitely not something she could bear. After all, Xing was in existence who could become a god emperor in the future. If something happened to Xing, the current god emperor would definitely not let her off easily. The old woman looked at Yi Hao. Seeing Yi Hao's fearless expression, the old woman's heart was pounding. She wasn't sure if she could save the princess in an instant. After thinking for a moment, she gave up this idea because she didn't dare to gamble. The old woman retracted her aura. I'll let you go, but you have to let the princess go. Yi Hao also heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that he had made the right bet. If the old woman really attacked regardless of everything, he would really be finished. Then, Yi Hao looked at the old woman mockingly. You're right. Would I be such an idiot? If I let her go, would you let me go? The old woman's expression turned even uglier. Obviously, Yi Hao was right. She was a third-order martial god. When had she ever been so cowardly? If not for the fact that Xing was in Yi Hao's hands, she would have torn Yi Hao into pieces long ago. Even at this time, he still dared to negotiate with her. But Xing was in Yi Hao's hands, so she had no choice but to hold back. Then what do you want? Let me go, and I'll naturally let her go when the time comes. Impossible. When she heard Yi Hao's words, the old woman immediately rejected him. She definitely couldn't let Yi Hao take Xing away. She definitely couldn't let anything happen to Xing. Then we'll just die together. Yi Hao also threw caution to the wind. Listen to him. Xing's face was red from being strangled by Yi Hao. She struggled to speak. The old woman's murderous aura surged to the sky. Her expression changed again and again. It was obvious that she was furious. But when she heard Zi Xing Er's words, the old woman had no choice but to step aside. Chapter 451. Let's go. Yi Hao grabbed Zi Xing and immediately flew away. Rumble! Suddenly, an earth-shaking sound came from behind them. It could be seen that the old woman was quite angry and was venting the anger in her heart. Little one, it's up to you. Yi Hao immediately summoned Little One. Little One directly shot into the depths of the magical beast forest. Ding dong, congratulations to host for killing a Class 7 magical beast. Congratulations to host for obtaining 700,000 experience points. Congratulations to host for obtaining 70,000 soul points. Ding dong, congratulations to host for killing a Class 6 magical beast. Congratulations to host for obtaining 60,000 experience points. Congratulations to host for obtaining 6,000 soul points. Ding dong, congratulations to host for killing a Class 8 magical beast. Congratulations to host for obtaining 8 million experience points. Congratulations to host for obtaining 800,000 soul points. After a while, the sound in Yi Hao's mind kept ringing. Little One was crazily hunting magical beasts, because Yi Hao knew that the old woman would not let him off so easily. She might even be following behind him at this moment. At this moment, he did not have any trump cards. If he let Zi Xing go, he would be in danger. At this moment, Yi Hao could only hope that Little One could hunt more magical beasts. At that time, he would be able to summon a martial god expert and make the old woman kneel at his feet and sing a song of conquest. You have to let me go, Zi Xing asked coldly. No hurry, Yi Hao replied softly. Just like that, he flew around the forest with Zi Xing. You scoundrel! Zi Xing did not expect that Yi Hao would still not let go of her. If Yi Hao did not let go of her, the old woman behind him would not be able to attack. Zi Xing glared at Yi Hao angrily, but Yi Hao did not pay attention to her at all. When your martial arts power is exhausted, I will personally deal with you. Yi Hao was flying now, and flying also consumed martial arts power. When Yi Hao's martial arts power was exhausted, Yi Hao would naturally not be her match. Thinking of this, Zi Xing was in a good mood. However, after flying for more than 2 hours, Zi Xing couldn't help but frown. Why does it seem like we're going in circles? Zi Xing looked at Yi Hao, but she suppressed the confusion in her heart. She wanted nothing more than to kill Yi Hao. She wouldn't ask Yi Hao anything. What the hell is this son of a bitch doing? The old woman, who was following Yi Hao from afar, couldn't help but frown. Little One, you're awesome. Yi Hao kept praying in his heart. Half a day had already passed, and his soul points had already risen to over 70 million. In the beginning, the increase was rather fast. However, perhaps because too many magical beasts had been killed, the system's notifications were far less frequent than before. In the first minute, it rang several times, but now it would only ring once every few minutes. 100 million soul points were required to summon a martial god expert. Most importantly, the martial god expert summoned by the 100 million soul points was only a random low-level martial god expert. In other words, the summoned martial god realm expert. They would appear randomly between the first and third order martial gods. This was also the reason why Yi Hao didn't use soul points to directly upgrade an existing general. Because upgrading an existing general would directly fix their cultivation at the first order martial god realm. At this time, a first-order martial god was obviously not enough to fight a third-order martial god old woman. Therefore, Yi Hao was trying to buy time to quickly accumulate 100 million experience points to summon a martial god expert. One day. Are you done? We've been flying for a day and you're just going in circles. Is there any meaning to it? 2 days. Hey, are you mute? 3 days. Can you let go of me? My time is precious. 8 days. At this time, Yi Hao had been flying for 8 days with her in tow. They had been flying around in the forest like a headless fly. Zi Xing couldn't figure out what Yi Hao was doing. At this time, she couldn't be bothered to talk to Yi Hao because she knew that even if she spoke to Yi Hao wouldn't pay attention to her. It's about time. After flying for 8 days, Yi Hao was already exhausted. However, there was a third-order martial god behind him who was staring at him like a poisonous snake. He couldn't relax at all. In this day, there were only 4 or 5 notifications in his mind. It was obvious that most of the surrounding demonic beasts had been killed by Little One. In order not to arouse the old woman's suspicion, Yi Hao brought Zi Xing as far away from Little One as possible. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for killing a 7th-order demonic beast. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 700,000 experience points. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 70,000 soul points. Enough. Yi Hao was overjoyed. However, before he could finish, the system notification sounded again. Ding dong, congratulations to the host. Little One's cultivation has broken through. He is now a 2nd-order martial god. Little One actually broke through. Yi Hao was a little surprised to hear that Little One had broken through to the 2nd-order martial god. This divine beast was indeed abnormal. As long as it killed, its cultivation could break through. Yi Hao rejoiced inwardly. This kind of existence was his subordinate. If it was the subordinate of an evil person, the consequences would be unimaginable. Host, I want to summon. Yi Hao immediately said to the system. Ding dong, do you wish to spend 100 million soul points to summon a martial god expert? Yes. Ding dong, congratulations to the host for summoning Zhuge Liang. He is now a 3rd-order martial god. What? Zhuge Liang? Yi Hao was surprised to hear Zhuge Liang. Can Zhuge Liang do it? One had to know that Zhuge Liang was a strategist in history. Would he be able to do it in this world of martial arts? Fortunately, Zhuge Liang was a 3rd-order martial god. If he was a 1st-order martial god, Yi Hao would probably cry himself to death. Kongming greets the Lord. Zhuge Liang, dressed in white, held a feather fan in his hand and bowed to Yi Hao with a smile. As expected, Zhuge Liang was also a young man. Looking at Zhuge Liang's scholarly aura, Yi Hao really doubted whether Zhuge Liang could do it. Lord, look at Kongming. Seeing that Yi Hao was at his wits' end, Zhuge Liang smiled and suddenly waved his fan forward. Rumble. A powerful force surged in the direction of the old woman. Who are you? Seeing the powerful force coming towards her, the old woman's face changed. So smart, so strong. She saw that Zhuge Liang could guess her predicament without her saying anything. Moreover, Yi Hao could feel that the force Zhuge Liang displayed was the strength of a 3rd-order martial god. It seemed like the system was very fair when it came to strength. However, Yi Hao started to worry about what would happen next. After all, the generals he summoned all had fighting skills, but Zhuge Liang did not. The old woman quickly recovered from her shock. However, she was surprised that a 3rd-order martial god realm master would appear out of nowhere without her noticing at all. Chapter 452. Liangzi, you have to do your best. Seeing the old woman flip out, Yi Hao immediately grabbed Zi Xing and left the battlefield. He was really worried for Zhuge Liang. However, Zhuge Liang seemed to have expected it. He easily dodged it and waved his feather fan with a smile. He actually dodged it. Seeing the old woman's attack miss, Yi Hao and Zi Xing were surprised. Let's see if you can still dodge it. Seeing Zhuge Liang easily dodge it, the old woman was stunned and attacked Zhuge Liang even faster. Xiao Yi, you go too. Seeing Xiao Yi return, Yi Hao immediately instructed Xiao Yi. The old woman's expression changed. What the hell is this? Get lost. Then, the old woman attacked Xiao Yi with her palm. Humph! Zhuge Liang suddenly snorted and waved the feather fan in his hand, attacking the old woman. The old woman felt a strong sense of danger, and had no choice but to withdraw her attack and try her best to dodge Zhuge Liang's attack. How is this possible? Xing'er's expression changed again and again. Her eyes were filled with shock as she looked at Zhuge Liang. The old woman's heart was the same. Because she realized that Zhuge Liang could only use the basic martial arts power but could not use martial art. It was as if Zhuge Liang did not know martial arts at all. Moreover, Zhuge Liang's realm was the same as hers. Logically speaking, it should be easy for her to kill Zhuge Liang. But the more she fought, the more she fought. She was anxious, and the more she fought, the more powerless she became. Because no matter how she attacked, Zhuge Liang seemed to be able to predict it and easily dodge it. Moreover, she had to guard against Xiao Yi and Zhuge Liang's simultaneous attack. No, if this continues, I'll be finished, the old woman thought anxiously. And Zhuge Liang seemed to be able to see through her thoughts. He attacked unhurriedly and was able to dodge the old woman's attack 100% of the time. Moreover, when the old woman wanted to attack Xiao Yi, Zhuge Liang would always be able to help Xiao Yi resolve the crisis at the critical moment. Could it be that he can see through other people's thoughts? Xing'er frowned as she thought. Xia, how about we reconcile? Xing'er saw that the old woman was at a disadvantage and was extremely anxious. She hesitated for a moment and spoke. Yi Hao ignored her and sneered in his heart. Now that they were at a disadvantage, they finally knew that they had to reconcile. What were they doing before? Moreover, Yi Hao believed that if he did not summon the martial god and waited until his power was exhausted, Xing'er would not let him off easily. Seeing that Yi Hao was silent, Xing'er was even more displeased. She swore that if she could survive, she would make Yi Hao die a horrible death. And that girl, she actually dared to compete with him for the deity position. She simply didn't know what was good for her. However, in order to survive, Xing'er had no choice but to lower her attitude. Tell me, what will it take for you to let us go? Miss Xing'er, this isn't an attitude for discussion. Yi Hao chuckled. You. Xing'er stamped the ground in anger, hating Yi Hao so much that she gritted her teeth. If you want to discuss it with me, you have to apologize to me first and show a friendly attitude. Yi Hao chuckled. Yi Hao was also very angry. It was one thing for Xing'er to pretend to be Zmo or to deceive him. If not for the fact that he was a 4th-level martial saint, he would probably have died in Xing'er's hands. Yi Hao naturally would not let Xing'er off so easily. You want me to apologize? Dream on. Xing'er said with a cold expression. What a joke. Who was she? She was a proud daughter of the heavens. She had always been high and mighty, an existence respected by billions of people. Moreover, in the future, she would control the Purple Heaven Divine Kingdom. If she apologized to Yi Hao, it would be the biggest stain on her. Therefore, she absolutely could not tolerate a stain on her. All right. Yi Hao shrugged, looking indifferent, because he was confident that he would let this arrogant woman know what was wrong. What are you trying to do? Xing'er suddenly felt a large hand pinching her buttocks and moving around her buttocks. Xing'er shuddered and her entire body stiffened. I'm warning you, don't do anything rash. Xing'er warned with a trembling voice. You pervert, hooligan, stop it. Xing'er shouted desperately. However, Yi Hao did not seem to hear her. His hand continued to move around Xing'er's buttocks. Needless to say, this arrogant woman still had a lot of meat on her buttocks. Yi Hao thought to himself. Let go of the princess, little bastard, or you will die a horrible death. Hearing Xing'er's voice, the old woman looked over. Take care of yourself first. Suddenly, Zhuge Liang's voice rang in the old woman's ears. The old woman was shocked, but it was too late. Zhuge Liang's feather fan and small one's attack had already landed on her body. The old woman spat out a mouthful of blood and her entire body flew backward. However, Zhuge Liang and Small One would not let go of this opportunity. They immediately chased after her and attacked again. The old woman spat out another mouthful of blood. If it was only a light injury at the beginning, it was now an injury on top of an injury. I was wrong. Seeing the old woman's miserable state and Yi Hao's hand on her body, she could not tolerate it. What did you say? I didn't hear you. Yi Hao sneered and said deliberately. You. Zi Xing'er felt like she was about to explode from anger. However, she could not do anything to Yi Hao, this rascal. She could only shout loudly, I was wrong. After shouting these 3 words, Zi Xing'er was like a defeated rooster. She finally lowered her proud head. That's more like it. With a slap, Yi Hao slapped Zi Xing'er's buttocks and then let go of her. Yi Hao clapped his hands. Seeing this scene, Zi Xing'er was completely furious. She had been taken advantage of, and she had not said anything. What did Yi Hao mean by this? After taking advantage of her, he still despised her? If that was not the case, why would Yi Hao clap his hands? I'm going to kill you. Zi Xing'er wanted to take out her purple star divine sword, but she realized that the purple star divine sword had already been snatched away by Yi Hao. Zi Xing'er could only randomly find a long sword and stab it at Yi Hao. Yi Hao frowned. He thought to himself that this woman was really asking for a beating. She could not be compared to Zmo at all. Yi Hao's figure flashed and once again snatched Zi Xing'er's long sword. This time, he held Zi Xing'er's waist. What are you doing? Zi Xing'er panicked again. Only then did she remember that she was no match for Yi Hao. Wasn't this asking for trouble? Zi Xing'er was really afraid that Yi Hao would go berserk and do something bad to her. Chapter 453. Feeling the burning pain on her buttocks, Zi Xing'er could not help but feel embarrassed and angry. When had she ever suffered such humiliation? Yi Hao did not hold back. He raised his hand and spanked Zi Xing'er's buttocks dozens of times. This was already considered light in Yi Hao's eyes. What a joke! This woman had tried to kill him time and time again. What was this little lesson to her? If not for the fact that Zi Xing'er was Zmo's sister, Yi Hao would not have let Zi Xing'er off so easily. How dare you point your sword at me? Smack. How dare you be so arrogant? Smack. It's good if you're as sensible as your sister. Smack. Before Yi Hao could finish his sentence, he had already spanked Zi Xing'er's round buttocks. Zi Xing'er gritted her teeth tightly at this moment. She felt extremely wronged in her heart and her tears fell uncontrollably. She was a goddess, the beloved daughter of the Purple Heaven Divine Emperor, a goddess who was doted on by everyone. When had she ever suffered such humiliation? Moreover, she was spanked by a man. This was equivalent to directly wiping out her halo. She swore in her heart that no matter what price she had to pay, she would definitely make Yi Hao die a horrible death. Sensing Zi Xing'er's tears, Yi Hao also felt his heart soften. No matter what, this was Zmo's sister. Yi Hao would not go overboard. Yi Hao believed that this bit of pain was nothing to Zi Xing'er. The reason why Zi Xing'er was crying was undoubtedly because her high and mighty self-esteem had been crushed by Yi Hao. That was why she felt wronged and cried. Feeling that Yi Hao had let go of her, Zi Xing'er raised her head. Her eyes were filled with hatred as she glared at Yi Hao. Your Highness, are you all right? Cough, cough. At this moment, the old woman had been caught and looked at Zi Xing'er with a pale face. Seeing the old woman's miserable appearance, Zi Xing'er frowned and the killing intent in her eyes grew even stronger. Speak, who are you? Yi Hao ignored the killing intent in Zi Xing'er's eyes and asked directly. Didn't that girl Zmo tell you her identity? Zi Xing'er wiped her tears and sneered. Looks like the relationship between the two of you isn't that great. Cut the crap. Otherwise, I can't guarantee her reputation, Yi Hao said coldly. He's just a servant. So what if he's killed? What does it have to do with me? Zi Xing did not even look at the old woman as she laughed coldly. When the old woman heard Zi Xing words, her expression changed drastically. She looked at Zi Xing in disbelief, following which the old woman laughed bitterly in her heart. As expected, the person whom the God Emperor has taken a fancy to is heartless. He had watched Zi Xing grow up from a young age. No matter what, there were feelings between the two of them. However, Zi Xing words made her realize how laughable her thoughts were. Yi Hao frowned. He did not expect Zi Xing to be so heartless. Compared to ZMO it was a world of difference. Yi Hao really could not understand why there was such a big difference between the two women who looked almost the same. Master, it's better to just kill a woman like her. Zhuge Liang waved his feather fan and said with a smile. That's not very good. Wouldn't it be a pity to kill such a beautiful woman? Yi Hao naturally understood what Zhuge Liang meant and said cooperatively. Then let her serve master and kill her after she's done. Zhuge Liang continued. The two of them discussed in front of Zi Xing. When Zi Xing heard their discussion, she immediately wanted to escape. However, her escape route had long been blocked by Zhuge Liang. She had nowhere to run. What do you want to do? Looking at Yi Hao, who was walking towards her step by step, Zi Xing immediately panicked. She was really afraid that Yi Hao would do something to her on a whim. Kid, I'm warning you. Her identity is not someone you can afford to offend. Although she was bitterly disappointed by Zi Xing's words, the old woman still could not bear to see Zi Xing being bullied. No, I'll answer whatever you ask. Seeing Yi Hao approaching her, Zi Xing finally could not resist and shouted. Who are you? Yi Hao retracted his hand and could not help but feel that it was a pity. Yi Hao could not help but feel a little evil in his heart. If only Zi Xing could hold on a little longer. My name is Zi Xing the goddess of Zitian Divine Kingdom. When she mentioned her identity, Zi Xing could not help but reveal a proud expression. Zitian Divine Kingdom. As soon as Yi Hao heard this name, he felt that this force was extraordinary. Moreover, Zi Xing dared to call herself a goddess. Then there was only one possibility. Zi Xing's force was a god-level force. And a god-level force was definitely a top existence in this 10,000 countries continent. However, Yi Hao did not understand why a god-level force like the Zitian Divine Kingdom would be interested in the emperor of a principality, a small figure. Furthermore, they had even arrested this person. Yi Hao finally understood why ZMO had told him not to look for him until he reached the martial god realm. This was because with his strength at that time, it would be difficult to find any clues about the Zitian Divine Kingdom even if he searched for a lifetime. After all, a divine kingdom was definitely not something that ordinary people or ordinary forces could touch. This was because in the eyes of ordinary warriors, martial sages and saint-level forces were already unattainable existences. It seemed that Mo did not think highly of me back then. Yi Hao smiled bitterly in his heart. Back then, ZMO had asked him to break through to the martial god realm. That was not to make things difficult for him at all. Breaking through to the martial god realm was just a starting point. He only had the qualifications to know the name of the Zitian Divine Kingdom. And according to common sense, it was impossible for a small figure in a principality to have any hope of breaking through to the martial god realm. As soon as he heard that the force behind Zi Xing was a god-level force, Yi Hao immediately felt a sense of pressure. He had thought that he had grown fast enough and should be able to rescue his father. But now it seemed that he was still far from it. After all, his enemy was not just a martial god, but an entire god-level force. Give me the location of the Zitian Divine Kingdom. Yi Hao asked Zi Xing. Ha you? You have the qualifications to know the location of the Zetian divine kingdom. Zi Xing sneered disdainfully. Yi Hao rubbed his palms and stared at Zi Xing butt. Sensing Yi Hao's gaze, Zi Xing subconsciously avoided Yi Hao's gaze. But then she thought that it was not a problem to give the location of the Zetian divine kingdom to Yi Hao. He was just a martial sage trash. Even if he had a third-order martial god by his side, compared to the Zetian divine kingdom, it was just an ant compared to a giant elephant. Moreover, even if Yi Hao did not find the Zetian divine kingdom, she would not let Yi Hao off easily. Thinking of this, Zi Xing immediately told Yi Hao the location of the Zetian divine kingdom. Chapter 454. Not interested. Yi Hao shrugged. His goal was to deal with the Purple Sky Divine Kingdom. He was not interested in dealing with a little girl like Zi Xing. Could it be that you're afraid? Zi Xing looked at Yi Hao provocatively. If you don't want anything to happen to ZMO, come to the Purple Sky Divine Kingdom obediently in a year. What did you say? Yi Hao's face instantly darkened. He hated it when people dared to threaten him. Yi Hao wanted to grab Zi Xing but Zi Xing had already taken the opportunity to grab the teleportation talisman. So you can get angry too. Ha ha, in a year, I will trample you under my feet like trash. Seeing Yi Hao's angry look, Zi Xing laughed proudly. I hope you don't seek death. Yi Hao clenched his fists and said with a gloomy face. Zi Xing had already teleported away. Your Highness. Seeing Zi Xing teleport away, the old woman completely panicked and shouted loudly. She did not expect Zi Xing to abandon her at the last moment. Do you want to live or die? Yi Hao looked at the old woman and asked in a deep voice. The old woman looked at Yi Hao with a cold expression. Moreover, the blood-stained double blades in Yi Hao's hands could stab her at any time. I didn't expect this. Granny Zisha, who has been loyal to the Purple Sky Divine Kingdom for so many years, would be abandoned by a little girl. Granny Zisha roared at the sky and laughed miserably. Boy, give me a painful death, because betraying the Purple Sky Divine Kingdom will not end well. Granny Zisha looked at Yi Hao with a pleading tone. Have you really decided? Seeing Granny Zisha's decision, Yi Hao still found it unbelievable. Boy, the strength of the Purple Sky Divine Kingdom is definitely not something a young boy like you can fight against. You will follow me sooner or later. Granny Zisha laughed mockingly. Granny Zisha looked at Yi Hao as if she was looking at a dead person. Boy, cut the crap. If you have the ability, then give me a painful death. After saying that, Grandma Zisha closed her eyes. Yi Hao took out an elixir and handed it to Grandma Zisha. Since you have some backbone, I'll reward you with this poison. What kind of pill is this? Granny Zisha looked at the elixir pill in Yi Hao's hand. Even with her knowledge and experience, she couldn't recognize what kind of elixir pill it was. What's the use of knowing so much when you're about to die? That's true. Hearing Yi Hao's words, Grandma Zisha no longer hesitated and swallowed the pill. But after waiting for a long time, she didn't feel anything wrong with her body. Granny Zisha opened her eyes and looked at Yi Hao's smiling face. She didn't understand and shouted, What did you give me to eat? Kneel. Yi Hao looked at Granny Violet Fiend. He didn't answer her question, but rather just spat out 2 words. What? Granny Zisha was stunned. Before she could react, her legs bent and she knelt on the ground, as if they didn't listen to her command. What did you give me to eat? Granny Zisha wanted to resist desperately, but she realized that she simply couldn't resist Yi Hao's command. What? Do you really want to die? Yi Hao sneered at Granny Zisha. Granny Zisha was at a loss for words. She had used all her courage to swallow the elixir pill just now. If she were to take another poison pill, she might not be able to be as resolute as before. Didn't you say that I couldn't fight against the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom? I will overthrow the entire Violet Sky Divine Kingdom for you to see, Yi Hao said, holding his breath. He believed that with the help of the system, he would definitely be able to accumulate enough strength to fight his way to the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom in a year's time. Granny Zisha sighed and shook her head. She obviously didn't take Yi Hao's words seriously. She thought that Yi Hao was just young and hot-headed. She knew very well how terrifying the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom was. It was absolutely unimaginable to outsiders. Let me ask you, do you know Yi Batian? Yi Hao looked at Granny Zisha and asked. Yi Batian? Who's that? Granny Zisha had never heard of the name Yi Batian before. You don't know? Yi Hao was a little surprised. He believed that with the mind control pill, Granny Zisha wouldn't lie to him. Granny Zisha shook her head. Although she was a third-order martial god, she was a well-known figure in the Myriad Kingdom continent. But in the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom, she was just like Zi Xing'er said, a servant. Things like Yi Batians were only known to the upper echelons. After all, who was Yi Batian? He was the Imperial Ant's man. But to put it bluntly, Yi Batian was a wild man. To the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom, this was a disgrace. How could it be spread outside? Naturally, it wasn't something that a character like her could come into contact with. In a secret mansion in the Violet Sky Divine Kingdom, Zmo was surrounded by starlight at this moment, and martial power like water wrapped around Zmo. Zmo's chest was moving up and down rhythmically. Kacha. Suddenly, a sound that only Zmo could hear clearly rang out, following which the martial arts around her surged into her body like crazy. At this time, a middle-aged woman who looked like a noblewoman quietly appeared beside Zmo. "Aunt, I've broken through." Zmo had consolidated her cultivation. When she saw the Imperial Ant, she was overjoyed. "I've said it before. As long as Mo works hard, no one can catch up." The Imperial Ant stroked Zmo's head lovingly. Zmo narrowed her eyes and enjoyed the Imperial Ant's touch very much. "I'm still 3 small realms behind Sister. I will definitely surpass Sister." Zmo clenched her pink fists and wrinkled her cute nose. "Alright, Mo, you've already reached the Martial Saint realm. You can't rush your cultivation. You can go out and play recently." The Imperial Ant looked at Zmo lovingly and said. One had to know that Zmo had cultivated for such a long time. In the past, she could not even think about it. After all, Zmo was playful by nature. To be able to persist for so long, in her opinion, it was really not easy. "Really?" Hearing the Imperial Ant's words, Zmo was so happy that she instantly jumped up. However, after a while, Zmo sat back down again. The Imperial Ant looked at Zmo with a puzzled expression. "Mo, what's wrong?" "Ant, I don't want to play. I want to surpass Sister as soon as possible so that you and Brother Yi Hao can meet as soon as possible. You're really my good child." Hearing Zmo's words, the Imperial Ant was very touched in her heart. "Aunt, actually, I miss Brother Yi Hao a little too." Zmo's voice became softer and softer, and finally, it was like a mosquito's voice. However, no matter how soft Zmo's voice was, it could not escape the Imperial Ant's ears. "When the time comes, how about I marry you to your brother Yi Hao?" The Imperial Ant's face was full of smiles. Chapter 455. Your Highness, may I know why you're looking for us? At this time, in Zi Xing'er's palace, Zi Xing'er sat on the throne with a displeased expression, staring sternly at the fat and thin martial emperors. At this time, the fat and thin martial emperors were also puzzled as they looked at Zi Xing'er carefully. "Let me ask you, did Mo come into contact with anyone a year ago?" Zi Xing'er asked coldly. The fat and thin martial emperors looked at each other and shook their heads. How dare you lie to me? Zmo shouted coldly as the power of a martial sage pressed down on the two of them. Thud! The two of them knelt on the ground as beads of sweat the size of beans fell from their faces and smashed onto the ground. Tell me the truth. Seeing the two of them panicking, Xing immediately slammed the throne, her eyes filled with anger. Yes. The fat martial emperor wiped his cold sweat and asked carefully, Your Highness! Your Highness is playful, and came into contact with many people a year ago. I wonder who Your Highness is talking about. Yes. I wonder who Your Highness is talking about? The thin martial emperor also quickly cooperated. One must know that what they were most worried about now was Yi Hao's identity being exposed. If the princess was talking about this matter, then they were finished. I'm asking about Xia Hao. At the mention of Yi Hao, Xing gnashed her teeth in hatred and did not notice the change in the expressions of the fat and thin martial emperors. Hearing Xia Hao's name, the fat and thin martial emperors trembled violently. They did not expect it to be Yi Hao. They didn't understand how the eldest princess knew about this. Your Highness, please spare our lives. The fat and thin martial emperors knew that they could not hide it anymore and knelt on the ground to beg for mercy. Speak, who is that Xia Hao? How does he know Mo? Xing ignored the fat and thin martial emperors and asked directly. Huh! The fat and thin martial emperors were stunned. Did Xing not know Yi Hao's identity? Your Highness, you don't know Xia Hao's identity? The fat martial emperor asked tentatively. Nonsense, if I knew, why would I need to ask you? Xing said with a displeased expression. Phew! The fat and thin martial emperors secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If it was only because of this, then they didn't have much responsibility. Your Highness, that Xia Hao is just a nobody. We didn't investigate him back then. The fat martial emperor still planned to continue hiding Yi Hao's identity. Since they had concealed it from the beginning, they had no choice but to conceal it to the end for the sake of their own safety. Impudent! Nobody? Would a nobody be a martial saint? Would a nobody have a martial god as a guard? Then who do you think you are? Xing asked unhappily. The fat and thin martial emperors were speechless. They really wanted to ask Xing if they were talking about the same person. There were martial saints and martial gods. What the hell was going on? Seeing the fat and thin martial emperors, Xing asked with a frown, The two of you really don't know? The fat and thin martial emperors immediately shook their heads. The reason for that was because they were unable to associate the person Xing spoke of with the person they knew. Moreover, they couldn't reveal Yi Hao's true identity even if they were beaten to death. That Xia Hao, does he have a different relationship with Mo? Xing was still unwilling to give up and asked tentatively. That Xia Hao and the little princess were just sightseeing. Nothing serious happened. Really? Absolutely. The fat and thin martial emperors immediately nodded. Seeing that she couldn't get any useful information, Xing waved her hand impatiently. Forget it, you can leave. Remember, don't leak out what happened today. Otherwise, you will suffer. Yes. With Xing's permission, the fat and thin martial emperors finally heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly left. Xia Hao, no matter who you are, in a year's time, I will kill you like a piece of trash. Xing looked into the void, her eyes revealing a strong murderous intent. Phew! You scared me to death. The thin martial emperor was still in shock. Do you think you're the only one who was shocked? My back is now wet and I almost peed myself. The fat martial emperor also patted his chest. Why do you think the first princess suddenly asked about this? The thin martial emperor asked curiously. The fat martial emperor shook his head and said angrily, You ask me, but who should I ask? But there must be something going on here. Otherwise, the first princess wouldn't ask us for no reason. I heard that the first princess has been out recently. Do you think the first princess has noticed something? The thin martial emperor said worriedly. I don't think so. Also, the first princess's gaze just now was clearly a murderous look. Thinking of Zi Xing-er's sharp gaze, the fat martial emperor still felt a lingering fear. Then what should we do now? The thin martial emperor's face was full of worry. If the first princess notices something, then us brothers will really be finished. Don't worry, whoever started the trouble should end it. You mean the little princess? And the imperial aunt? Why are the two of you here? In the imperial aunt's divine palace. The imperial aunt was sitting on the throne while Zmo stood beside her. The imperial aunt asked. Although the imperial aunt did not use any martial arts power, just by feeling the imperial aunt's aura, the fat and thin martial emperors had no choice but to kneel down obediently. The fat and thin martial emperors looked at Zmo and hesitated. Seeing the martial emperor's expressions, the imperial aunt looked at Zmo in confusion. Zmo immediately said, If you have something to say, just say it. If you haven't done anything bad, I won't blame you. Thank you, imperial aunt, thank you, little princess. The fat and thin martial emperors immediately thanked her. What are you thanking me for? You haven't said anything yet. Zmo was even more puzzled. Imperial aunt, little princess, Her Highness the eldest princess called us over just now. The plump martial emperor immediately said. That girl, Xing is back? The imperial aunt was also a little surprised by Zi Xing return. If that girl called you over, why did you come to me instead? Because the first princess asked us about an important matter. This matter is of great importance, and we can't make up our minds, so we can only report it to the imperial aunt and little princess. Oh? What is it? Is it so serious? The imperial aunt was also full of curiosity about the fat martial emperor's words, and Zmo was also curious. It's about. For a moment, the fat martial emperor did not know how to address Yi Hao. After thinking for a moment, he said, It's about Prince Yi Hao. What? The imperial aunt's expression suddenly changed. As soon as she heard Yi Hao, she immediately took it seriously, and the power in her body raged uncontrollably in the hall. Immediately, the imperial aunt's killing intent soared as she looked sharply at the fat and thin martial emperors. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.